Chapter 464, Festival of the Red Sun 4. I woke up to the soft hiss of filtered air and the distant rhythm of a mana monitor. The ceiling above me was a dull off-white, the kind you only ever saw in hospitals or places where comfort was an afterthought. My body felt heavy, like someone had poured molten lead into my veins and forgot to drain it out. Every breath I took felt wrong, too controlled, like the room itself was making sure I didn't forget I wasn't in charge right now. It took a moment to sit up. A long one. My hands were shaking and my vision swam with static. But I pushed through. I had to. Then it came back. The way the mana inside me had twisted, spiraled, snapped, and how I'd lost control. No. Not just lost it. Unleashed it. And they were there. Rachel. Cecilia. Serafina. Rose. I saw their faces. I felt their fear. Because of me. Damn it. I muttered, my voice hoarse and dry. You were trying to protect them, a voice echoed gently in my mind. I blinked. Luna. She was always there, even when I tried to forget. Even when I didn't deserve her. You saw what I did. What I almost did. Don't try to coddle me. You lost control, yes. But you didn't give in. You held on at the last second. That matters, Arthur. I sighed and stared down at my hands. They were mine. But I didn't feel like me. I should have handled it better. I should have, I don't know, trained more, held back. Anything but that. Anything but turning on the people I love. The words burned coming out. I hadn't said it aloud before. Not even to myself. But it was true. I loved them. All four of them. And I'd nearly destroyed everything. I leaned back against the bed, letting the silence press down on me. And for once I let myself breathe. I wasn't dead. I hadn't killed anyone. That was something. Not much, but something. I took another breath. Then I swung my legs over the side of the bed and slowly stood. Unsteady but upright. A few more minutes and I could. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Alisara Velcroix stepped inside. She looked exactly how I remembered her. Calm. Immaculate. Perfect posture, measured steps. That subtle scent of cold metal and starflowers followed her like a memory. And as always, those eyes, too sharp, too familiar. I stiffened instantly. What do you want? I asked, harsher than I meant to. The hostility bled out without permission. She tilted her head slightly but didn't flinch. You're awake. Good. I wasn't planning to stay in bed forever. We stared at each other for a moment too long. She didn't look away. I hated that. Because every time I looked at her, a part of me whispered something I couldn't quite grasp. A familiarity I couldn't place. And I couldn't shut it up no matter how hard I tried. Is that it? I asked, keeping my tone cold. You just came to check if the unstable lunatic survived his breakdown? A flicker of something crossed her face. Guilt? Pain? I wasn't sure. Maybe I imagined it. No, she said, voice quieter now. I came to ask you something. I didn't move. Come to the festival, she said. No sarcasm. No games. Just words. I blinked. What? I want you to come with me. Just come. Her voice wasn't commanding. It was genuine. Almost unsure. That threw me off more than anything. No, I said automatically, but it came out weak. I wanted to say more. Wanted to push her away, keep that distance, pretend she wasn't who I feared she might be. But my throat closed around the words. She looked at me, really looked. And for the first time I couldn't see the sharp Velcroix brilliance or the calculated daughter of high nobility. I just saw a girl asking someone not to leave her behind. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Fine, I said quietly. She smiled. And I hated that I didn't regret it. The Festival of the Red Sun transformed the Southern Sea Palace into something otherworldly, a place where reality felt thinner, where the boundaries between the mundane and the mystical blurred into ruby-tinged twilight. Lanterns floated overhead like captive stars and the air was heavy with incense and anticipation. I shouldn't have been there. The medical staff had protested vehemently when Alisara arrived with formal attire for me, a suit of deep crimson and black that matched her own ensemble far too perfectly to be coincidence. But no one, not even the head physician, could overrule the chief advisor to Lord Daedric. So here I was, walking beside her through the central courtyard, my body still aching from the mana deviation, my mind clouded with questions I couldn't voice. You should try this, Alisara said, offering me a small cup filled with something that glowed faintly golden. Some blessed wine. It's only served during the festival. I hesitated, then took it, our fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. The contact sent an uncomfortable jolt through me, not unpleasant exactly, but disorienting. Like déjà vu, but stronger. It won't poison you, she added with a hint of amusement. Though I'm flattered you think I'd need to resort to such methods. That's not what I was thinking, I replied, taking a small sip. The wine was unlike anything I'd tasted before, warm honey and distant spices, with an aftertaste like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. I felt my tense muscles relax slightly as the liquid's subtle mana infusion worked through my system. What were you thinking then? Alisara asked, her cyan eyes studying me with that unsettling intensity that always made me feel exposed. I looked away, scanning the crowd instinctively. I was wondering where my friends are. A shadow passed briefly over her face, so quickly I might have imagined it. The academy students have their own section for the festivities, she said smoothly. We can find them later if you'd like. But first, there's something I want to show you. Before I could press further, she led me toward a performance area where dancers in flame-colored silks moved in hypnotic patterns around a central fire. Their movements told a story, the ancient myth of the red sun's creation, how it had been torn from the sky by jealous gods and shattered into 7 aspects before being restored by a hero's sacrifice. Despite myself, I was captivated. The dancers moved with inhuman grace, their bodies bending and flowing in ways that suggested enhancement either through training methods or actual physical modifications. In the academy, we'd studied various cultural expressions of mana manipulation, but I'd never seen it integrated so seamlessly with art. Beautiful, isn't it? Alisara murmured, standing close enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence against my arm. Yes, I admitted. It's impressive. The lead dancer is from a bloodline that has performed this ritual for over 700 years, she explained. The movements are passed down genetically, muscle memory encoded into their very DNA. I glanced at her, surprised. That's not possible. Genetic memory doesn't work that way. She smiled enigmatically. Many things are possible in the Southern Sea that the outside world considers impossible, Arthur. You of all people should understand that. There was something in the way she said my name, like she was tasting it, testing how it felt. It made me uneasy. I should find my friends, I said abruptly, taking a step back. They'll be worried about me. They know you're with me, Alisara replied, though something in her tone struck me as off. But if you're concerned about them, you can try your communicator. I reached for the device at my wrist, only to find it unresponsive. It's not working. Ah, I forgot to mention, communication devices are temporarily disabled during certain ceremonies. Security protocol. She gestured vaguely toward one of the palace towers. It's only within specific areas, though. If we move away from the main ritual grounds. I nodded, not entirely convinced but unwilling to make a scene. Lead the way. Instead of heading toward less crowded areas, however, Alisara guided me deeper into the palace complex, through corridors I'd never seen despite months of residing at the academy nearby. The festival crowds thinned, then disappeared entirely until we were alone in a small garden enclosed by walls of living crystal that hummed faintly with mana. This should be far enough from the interference, she said, though she made no move to remind me to try my communicator again. Instead, she seated herself on a bench carved from what appeared to be a single massive ruby, patting the space beside her. Sit with me, Arthur. Please. I remained standing. What is this place? Chapter 465, Festival of the Red Sun, 5. The Star Garden. It's usually restricted to the royal family and their closest advisors. She looked up at the night sky where the red sun hung like a baleful eye among the stars. But tonight, exceptions can be made. Reluctantly, I sat beside her, maintaining a careful distance. The crystal walls around us caught the moonlight and refracted it in patterns that reminded me uncomfortably of mana circuitry, the kind used in advanced containment systems. Why did you really bring me here, Alisara? She turned to face me fully, and something in her expression shifted, became more vulnerable, more human. Because I wanted to speak with you. Alone. Without the weight of our respective positions. What's that supposed to mean? It means I know who you are, Arthur. Who you really are. Her voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. And I think, somewhere deep down, you know who I am too. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? She reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away, and touched my face with fingertips that felt both alien and achingly familiar. There was someone in your past. Someone important. I'm sure of it. I jerked back as if burned, my heart hammering against my ribs. Stop it. You don't know anything about me. No? She agreed, lowering her hand. Perhaps not everything. Just as you don't know everything about who you once were. We've both been reshaped by time and circumstance. But the connections remain, Arthur. The threads that bind us can't be severed so easily. My mind raced, trying to make sense of her words while fighting the nauseating sense of recognition that threatened to overwhelm me. This is insane. You're manipulating me. Whatever you think you know about my past, eh? I don't think, Arthur. I know. Alisara's voice hardened slightly. I know about someone from your past. About a connection too powerful to be erased completely. I'm sure of it. I stood abruptly, hands clenched at my sides. Where are my friends? What have you done with them? Her expression softened again, but this time it felt calculated, a mask sliding back into place. They're enjoying the festival, just as I said. Why would I lie about something so easily verified? Because something's wrong. I can feel it. I activated my mana circuits, preparing to forcibly break through whatever communication barrier existed between us and the academy students. I'm going to find them. Now. Wait, Alisara said, rising to her feet with that fluid grace that always seemed slightly inhuman. I haven't shown you the most important part of the garden yet. I don't care about the garden. You should. Her smile turned sad. It's where I first remembered who I was. Who we were to each other. Despite my better judgment, I hesitated. What do you mean? Let me show you. She extended her hand. Just a moment more, Arthur. Then, if you still wish to find your friends, I won't stop you. I shouldn't have taken her hand. Every instinct screamed against it. But that same inexplicable pull that had drawn me to her since our first meeting, that sense of recognition that haunted me, was too strong to resist. Her fingers intertwined with mine, cool and certain. She led me to the center of the garden where a small pool reflected the night sky with unnatural clarity. Look, she whispered, gesturing to the water's surface. I peered down, expecting to see our reflections. Instead, the pool shimmered and darkened, images forming like memories given liquid form. I saw a massive temple complex bathed in red light, people in ceremonial robes kneeling before a man whose face was obscured by an ornate mask. The red chalice, Alisara said softly, her voice taking on a resonance I'd never heard before. The oldest and most powerful cult devoted to the worship of the red sun. And that, she pointed to the masked figure, was my father. The Pope. The image shifted, revealing a younger Alisara, perhaps 16 or 17, standing beside an almost identical boy. Twins, dressed in ceremonial garb, their faces solemn as they received some kind of blessing. My brother and I were born to continue his legacy, she continued, her grip on my hand tightening slightly. But only one of us could succeed him. I watched as the scenes unfolded, years of brutal training, rituals conducted in chambers far beneath the earth, sacrifices I couldn't bear to watch but couldn't look away from. Through it all, the twins grew, their competition becoming increasingly ruthless until I won, Alisara stated simply as the pool showed her standing over her brother's body, blood dripping from her hands. Not because I was stronger, initially, but because I understood what he didn't, that true power comes from embracing one's nature completely without hesitation or remorse. The pool's surface rippled, the images changing to show massive underground chambers beneath what I recognized as the Southern Sea Sun Palace. Within these chambers were rows upon rows of crystal containment units, each holding a figure that seemed both human and not. Resurrection, she said simply. The vampires are ready to emerge, Arthur. After centuries of dormancy, after generations of careful preparation, the time has come. Tonight, with the red sun at its zenith, the vampire monarch himself will awaken fully, and with him, his entire court. This is insane, I said, my voice hoarse. You're insane. Her expression softened unexpectedly. This is why I wanted you here, Arthur. Because I knew you wouldn't understand, not immediately. But you will. In time, you'll see the necessity of it all. My friends, I said suddenly, understanding flooding through me. They discovered this, didn't they? That's why you've been keeping me isolated. They're trying to stop you. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. Your friends are persistent, I'll grant them that. But by now, they've likely encountered the vampire monarch. And unlike you, they don't have my protection. Cold dread settled in my stomach. What have you done? Nothing yet, she replied, moving toward me with that same liquid grace. But soon, very soon, the choice will no longer be mine to make. So I'm offering you one last opportunity, Arthur. One choice that could change everything. She stopped directly in front of me, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in her cyan eyes, could smell that familiar scent of cold metal and starflowers. Stay with me, she said, her voice soft but intense. Stand at my side as the world transforms. As something greater emerges from the ashes of the old order. I can protect you, protect those you care for, even. But only if you choose me. For one terrible moment, I almost considered it. Not because I believed her twisted vision, but because of that inexplicable pull between us, that sense that we were connected in ways I couldn't understand. But then I thought of Rachel, of Cecilia, of Rose and Serafina. Of Callie and Reka. Of my family in this world. Of Lucifer and Jean. People who had stood by me, fought for me, believed in me. No, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. I will never choose your side. Because whatever you think we were to each other in the past, you're not that person now. You're something else, something twisted by power and ambition. Something fractured in her expression, a crack in the perfect mask she always wore. For the briefest moment, I saw genuine pain in her eyes, a vulnerability that seemed almost human. But it vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. I expected as much, she said, her voice taking on that strange resonance again. But it doesn't matter, Arthur. Not really. Because I don't actually need your willing cooperation. Her smile widened, and even now it was as pretty as ever. I'll break you, she continued, her voice distorting, harmonics layering over each other until it barely sounded human. I'll reshape you until you forget there was ever any choice at all. And in the end, you'll stand beside me willingly because you'll no longer remember any other way to be. Crimson threads began to emerge from her skin, not blood, but something more primal, more terrifying. They writhed like living things, reaching toward me with apparent hunger. I stumbled back, channeling what little mana I had left into a defensive barrier, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. Not against whatever Alisara had become. The threads surged forward, and were cut by a near-invisible sword strike. My heart calmed down as I recognized this power. It was my master, the Martial King, Magnus Dracar. Chapter 466, Chaos 1. Fuck, that scared the shit out of me. Cecilia snapped, stumbling back as the surge of pressure faded like the aftershock of a gravity quake. Her voice broke the stillness, but nobody laughed. No one even breathed. They were all too busy staring, eyes wide, lungs locked, brains refusing to process what stood ahead of them. Is that? Serafina's voice was low, but not out of calm. No, hers was the voice of someone watching a god rise from its grave. The vampire monarch Caladros von Noctis? A silence settled like a cold mist. Heavy. Suffocating. They all knew that name. Everyone in the room had been raised on the stories, fed the legends of the one who nearly brought about humanity's extinction. The vampire monarch. The nightmare that bled daylight, second only to the heavenly demon himself in power and infamy. He hadn't just ruled. He had waged war on an entire continent and nearly won. The golden age of the East had ended with his fangs buried in its throat. Tiamat and the first hero had stopped him. Barely. At a cost. He'd been killed. Erased. So what the hell was he doing here? That's impossible, Seola whispered, clutching her arm as if grounding herself. He was killed. I read the accounts. They buried his body in consecrated steel and burned his name from every archive. The figurehead wasn't fully formed yet. Not entirely. He hovered slightly above the ground as if gravity itself had yet to decide if it wanted to hold him down. His presence flickered like a half-broken transmitter, his aura warping the very air around him, bending it into something ancient and wrong. Cracks of dark light pulsed along his limbs like veins beneath glass. His skin was pale, too pale, more marble than flesh. And his eyes, those flickering red eyes, looked too tired for someone who should have been dead. Not tired like a man, though. Tired like a disaster waiting to wake up. He's not. Dia swallowed, her voice shaking as the dots connected in her mind. He's not whole. They looked at her. She took a step back, her face pale. He's not fully healed. That aura, it's leaking. Incomplete. He shouldn't even be awake yet. He's supposed to be my father. She stopped. Her voice cracked. My father used the red sun, she whispered. He used it to heal him. There was a long pause. Then the panic came. Lucifer's hand drifted to his blade. Rachel's fingers twitched with barely restrained mana. Seola's eyes glowed faintly, already calculating escape routes. And Seraphina. Seraphina looked like she'd just been betrayed by history itself. The monarch didn't move. He didn't need to. His presence did all the speaking for him. It loomed like a tidal wave waiting to collapse. He wasn't back. Not yet. But he was waking up. Rose was the first to recover, her analytical mind cutting through the paralysis of fear. We need to leave. Now. Whatever is happening here is beyond our capacity to handle. Wait, Rachel whispered, her head snapping toward the entrance they'd used. Something's The warning died in her throat as the air temperature plummeted. Frost crystallized across the black marble floor in intricate patterns, spreading from the doorway like a living thing. The ruby quartz walls dimmed as though something was drinking in their light. A figure materialized at the chamber's entrance, tall, aristocratic, with white hair that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the crimson glow. His eyes were the color of spilled blood, and when he smiled, the fangs that gleamed weren't for show. Visitors, he purred, his voice carrying both age and hunger in equal measure. How fortuitous. Cecilia ignited her hands with crimson flame, the heat pushing back against the unnatural cold. What the actual hell? A vampire, Seraphina stated, her voice controlled despite the impossibility before them. An elder by the look of him. Perceptive, the vampire acknowledged with a slight bow that managed to be both courtly and mocking. Elder Lazarus, at your service. Though I believe some of you require no introduction. His gaze fixed on Rachel, recognition flickering in those inhuman eyes. The healer from Redmond City. I remember you. You tended to that troublesome boy after his disagreement with Bishop Vale. Rachel stiffened, her fingers curling into defensive positions as her mana circuits flared to life beneath her skin. You can't be real. Vampires were purged centuries ago. How disappointing. They teach you nothing of truth at that academy of yours. Elder Lazarus took a step forward, his movements too fluid, too perfect. We were never purged. Merely dormant. Waiting. From the shadows behind him emerged more figures, 5 robed priests in deep crimson, their faces hidden behind grotesque masks fashioned after screaming visages. Each carried a staff topped with a ruby that pulsed in time with the walls around them. And beside the vampire elder stepped a familiar face that made Rachel's blood run cold. Bishop Vale, she breathed. The bishop's gaunt face twisted into a smile that never reached his eyes. His once immaculate robes were now trimmed with crimson symbols that writhed like living things when looked at directly. The faithful girl who healed the heretic. How lovely to see you again. You're working with vampires? Lucifer's voice cut through the tension, his blade now drawn, golden light emanating from its edge. You, a bishop of the Eastern Church? Vale laughed, the sound hollow and wrong. Working with? No, boy. I serve. As all will serve when the monarch fully awakens. The priests moved in practiced formation, spreading out to flank the group from different angles. The ruby crystals atop their staffs began to glow more intensely, feeding energy into the chamber. They're accelerating the awakening process, Seola warned, her enhanced perception tracking the mana flows. The red sun's energy, they're channeling it directly into the monarch. Rose's voice was tight. Lucifer, Cecilia, combat formation 3. Rachel, barrier protocol. Seraphina with me. Seola, keep tracking the mana currents. Dia. She hesitated, glancing at the princess who stood frozen in horror at her father's betrayal. I can fight, Dia said, surprising everyone as she stepped forward, golden light crackling between her fingers. This is my home. My responsibility. Elder Lazarus's smile widened, revealing more teeth than should have been possible. How adorable. The princess thinks she can stand against an ascendant-rank vampire. And Bishop Vale here may not match my power, but even at low ascendant he's more than enough for children playing at war. We've faced worse, Cecilia snarled, though they all knew it was bravado. Have you? The vampire elder asked softly, and then he moved. One moment he was by the door, the next he was directly in front of Cecilia, his hand closing around her throat. Only her instinctive flame barrier saved her from having her neck snapped. The fire erupted between them, forcing the elder back with a hiss of annoyance rather than pain. The battle erupted in a chaos of light and sound. Bishop Vale chanted words that twisted the air itself, reality rippling around his gestures as he wove miasma spells. The priests moved in coordination, their staffs channeling blasts of crimson energy that sought targets with unnatural precision. Lucifer engaged Vale directly, his blade trailing golden light as he executed a sequence of strikes that should have overwhelmed any normal opponent. But the bishop moved with unnatural speed, miasma coating his hands as he parried and countered with strength that belied his gaunt frame. Rachel maintained a barrier around the group, her healing abilities strained to the limit as she simultaneously reinforced their defenses and treated injuries that accumulated despite their best efforts. Sweat beaded on her forehead, her teeth gritted in concentration. "We can't win this," she muttered to Rose, who fought beside her, protecting her from the priest's increasingly aggressive attacks. "Not here, not against them." "We don't need to win," Rose replied, her voice tight with exertion. "We just need to survive long enough to escape." Elder Lazarus seemed to be toying with them, appearing and disappearing around the chamber, landing blows that were painful but deliberately non-lethal. His expression was one of amused contempt as he batted away Seraphina's most powerful attacks like they were child's play. "Look how they struggle," he said to Vale, casually dodging Cecilia's most explosive assault. "It's almost endearing." The chamber door exploded inward with such force that fragments of crystal embedded themselves in the far wall. Everyone, even Elder Lazarus, paused at the sudden intrusion. Arthur Nightingale stood in the shattered doorway, his face pale but his eyes burning with cold fury. His mana signature, still weakened from his deviation, nevertheless pulsed with deadly intent. "Get away from them," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute threat. He moved, not with the inhuman speed of the vampire but with the perfect efficiency that had made him a legend at the academy. His first strike wasn't aimed at any of their attackers but at the floor beneath his friend's feet. "Down!" he shouted, and those who had fought alongside him didn't hesitate. They dropped as one, Ceola pulling Dia down with her as Arthur's blade slammed into the black marble floor. For a moment, nothing happened, then cracks spread outward in a perfect circle, mana energizing them, widening them. "No!" Bishop Vale lunged forward, but too late. The floor collapsed beneath them, sending Arthur and the others plummeting into darkness. Elder Lazarus moved with blinding speed, reaching for Rachel's ankle as she fell, but Lucifer's blade flashed, forcing the vampire to pull back with a snarl of frustration. They fell, tumbling through layers of ancient stone and crystal, Rachel's barrier expanding to cushion their descent. They crashed through multiple levels of the palace's substructure before finally landing in a chamber so old that the dust of centuries billowed up around them. Arthur, who had somehow managed to control his fall to land on his feet, immediately moved to help the others. "Is everyone all right?" "Define all right," Cecilia groaned, sitting up with a wince. "Because I think my definition just got drastically revised." Rose was already on her feet, assessing their new surroundings. "Where are we?" "Deeper," Dia said, her eyes scanning their surroundings. "Much deeper than the official palace blueprints show." A distant rumbling from above reminded them of the danger they'd temporarily escaped. "They'll find a way down," Lucifer said, wiping blood from a cut on his cheek. "We don't have long." Arthur nodded, his expression grim. "Then we need to find another way out. Or..." He glanced around the ancient chamber at the symbols of power and sacrifice that adorned every surface. "Or we need to find something here that can help us fight back." Rachel moved to his side, briefly touching his arm. "Arthur, how did you even find us?" "Last we knew, you were in a coma." "Yes," he finished for her. "It's complicated." "Someone helped me." "Someone?" Seraphina asked sharply. Before Arthur could explain, a tremor shook the chamber, dust and small fragments of stone raining down from above. The rumbling grew louder, more insistent. Chapter 467, Chaos 2. Lee's eyes narrowed as he leaned back in his chair, his gaze locked on Daedric. The Lord of the Southern Sea Sun Palace was radiating smug confidence, his voice dripping with self-satisfaction as he rattled off an increasingly absurd list of demands for compensation for what he smugly called their failed investigation. There was something about the man's demeanor that set Lee on edge, the oily triumph in his smile as if he'd already won a game the rest of them hadn't realized they were playing. Lee didn't need to be told something on this island reeked of deceit, though every lead they had pursued so far had yielded nothing. Lee's knuckles tightened on the armrest of his chair as he bit back the urge to lash out, his immortal rank senses flaring as he tried to pinpoint the source of his unease. And then it happened. The ceremonial gongs that had been ringing throughout the Festival of the Red Sun suddenly fell silent. In the unnatural quiet that followed, Daedric's smile froze, his smug words caught in his throat as his body shuddered. The color drained from his face, leaving him pallid and wide-eyed as though he'd just seen the hand of death hovering over his shoulder. "It's time," Daedric whispered, seemingly to himself. Lee was on his feet in an instant, astral energy flaring to life around him in sapphire brilliance. "What have you done?" Before Daedric could respond, screams erupted from the festival grounds below. Not the playful shrieks of celebration, but genuine terror, cutting through the night air like knives. "You dare high vampires?" Lee said, his voice low and dangerous, every syllable heavy with menace. His gaze burned into Daedric, who recoiled slightly under the weight of it. For a moment, Daedric's mouth opened as though he might deny it. But he stopped himself, his lips pressing into a thin line. The pretense was useless now. Lee took a step forward, his astral energy humming ominously around him. I asked you a question, Daedric. Without a word, Daedric raised his hands. His expression twisted into something between desperation and fury as he unleashed a torrent of red divine flames, the raw power of the Southern Sea Sun Palace's legendary grade artifact bursting forth like a tidal wave of fire. Lee didn't flinch. His astral energy expanded in an instant, a shimmering barrier that collided with the flames. The room shook violently as the two forces clashed, sending crackling energy and flickering shadows dancing along the walls. You betrayed your own people, Lee growled, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Do you think your flames can save you now? In the central courtyard of the palace, the festival of the Red Sun had transformed from celebration to nightmare in mere moments. Professor Nero Estrellan had been observing a traditional dance performance when he felt it, a sudden sickening shift in the mana currents flowing through the palace grounds. The dancers faltered, their graceful movements stuttering as they too sensed the wrongness permeating the air. Then they came. Figures in crimson robes emerged from the shadowed corridors, their faces hidden behind grotesque masks depicting screaming visages. At first, festival-goers mistook them for part of the ceremony until the staffs they carried erupted with blood-red energy, cutting down the nearest attendees with brutal efficiency. Shields up! Nero roared, golden mana surging from his palms to create a protective barrier around the nearest group of students. Academy students, defensive formations. Protect the civilians. Across the courtyard, Professor Callier was already moving, her hands weaving complex patterns as she summoned walls of elemental force to funnel noncombatants toward the exits. This way. Move quickly. But escape routes were rapidly disappearing. From the shadows between buildings, pale figures with inhuman grace and blood-red eyes emerged, vampires, their very existence a violation of history itself. They moved with predatory precision, cutting off retreat paths and isolating groups of terrified revelers. Impossible, gasped a senior student as he witnessed a vampire tear through a palace guard with casual ease. They're supposed to be extinct. Focus. Professor Esther snapped, her normally reserved demeanor replaced by battle-hardened authority. Form up and follow protocols. This is not a drill. Academy students rallied to their professor's commands, years of training kicking in despite their shock. Healers established triage points, already working on the injured. Mana specialists coordinated to reinforce barriers. But they were outnumbered and caught completely unprepared. A vampire elder appeared at the edge of the great fountain, his aristocratic features and elegant bearing at odds with the carnage around him. With a casual gesture, he froze the water mid-spray, transforming it into crimson ice that shattered into thousands of deadly shards flying toward a group of cornered students. Professor Nero intercepted the attack, his golden barrier absorbing most of the impact, though several shards pierced through, drawing lines of blood across his forearm. Ah, the famed tactician, the vampire elder purred, his voice carrying unnaturally over the chaos. I was hoping to meet you. Nero's eyes narrowed as he recognized the vampire. Cassius, he said. Alisara's student. Cassius smiled, revealing fangs that gleamed in the festival lantern's light. Someone who is going to die doesn't need to know names, he replied, but yes, I learned much from the chief advisor. He moved with blinding speed, crossing the distance between them faster than most eyes could track. His fist, wreathed in blood-red mana, crashed against Nero's hastily reinforced barrier. The impact sent Nero sliding backward, his boots leaving furrows in the decorative stones. Around them, similar scenes played out across the festival grounds, professors and senior students engaging vampires and cultists in desperate combat while trying to protect the vulnerable. Professor. A student rushed to Nero's side, her combat robes already torn and bloodied. The eastern exit is blocked. At least 30 cultists and 3 vampires. The western path? Nero asked, not taking his eyes off Cassius, who circled them with predatory patience. Professor Callier is holding it, but she can't maintain the barrier much longer. Too many attackers. Nero made a split-second decision. Get to Callier. Tell her to focus on evacuation. Abandon the eastern and northern sectors, we'll concentrate our forces on the western escape route. The student hesitated. But there are still people in those sectors. I know, Nero cut her off, his voice heavy. We can't save everyone. Go. Now. As she raced off to deliver the message, Cassius laughed. Such painful choices you make, Professor. Deciding who lives and who dies. Unlike you, Nero replied coldly, I value human life. A quaint sentiment, Cassius mused, soon to be obsolete. He attacked again, this time accompanied by 2 more vampires who had finished with their previous victims. Nero found himself fighting defensive battle, his golden barrier straining against the coordinated assault. Across the courtyard, students fought with everything they had. Professor Esther stood atop an overturned float, raining elemental destruction on cultists who attempted to breach the western evacuation route. Her normally immaculate appearance was gone, hair wild, robes singed, blood trickling from a cut above her eye, but her magic remained devastatingly precise. Keep moving. She shouted to the stream of people fleeing toward the relative safety of the western gate. Don't stop. Don't look back. A child stumbled in the crowd, separated from her parents. Before the cultists could reach her, a young academy student dove through the chaos, scooping up the girl and rolling beneath a swing of a cultist's staff. The student, barely 14 himself, carried the child to safety, his own back exposed to attack. Professor Callier's wind blade cut down the pursuing cultist just in time, her face grim with determination and exhaustion. But for every small victory, the defenders suffered multiple losses. The vampires were simply too strong, the cultists too numerous, and the surprise too complete. What had begun as a fighting retreat was rapidly becoming a rout. In the midst of the chaos, Nero found himself driven back toward the central dais where the ceremonial artifacts of the festival had been displayed. Cassius and his fellow vampires pressed their advantage, forcing the professor into an increasingly desperate defense. You feel it, don't you? Cassius taunted, effortlessly dodging a counterattack. The futility. The inevitable end. Nero didn't waste breath responding. His resources were depleting rapidly, his options narrowing with each exchange. Around him, he could see his students fighting, dying, trying to protect each other, and the innocent festival-goers caught in this nightmare. Pride mingled with despair in his heart. They fought so valiantly, these young people he had trained. But it wouldn't be enough. Not against this. As if confirming his thoughts, a tremor ran through the palace grounds. The ruby crystal decorations that had adorned the festival suddenly brightened, pulsing with synchronous energy. The red sun itself, hanging in the night sky, seemed to flare in response. It begins, Cassius whispered, his eyes gleaming with fanatic reverence. And in that moment, Nero understood. The festival, the attack, it was all a diversion. The real purpose lay elsewhere, deeper in the palace. Whatever was happening, he prayed some of his students had survived to stop it. Because here, in the blood-soaked festival grounds of the Southern Sea Sun Palace, the battle was already lost. Chapter 468, Vampire Elder 1. Striking first was always better than waiting to be attacked. As such, when the rumbling began, I attacked first instead of waiting. My blade flashed forward in a perfect arc, aiming for the Vampire Elder mid-descent. But Elder Lazarus twisted in the air with impossible grace, evading my strike entirely. For all my training, the gap between us was clear. A wounded academy student against an ascendant-rank vampire wasn't a fair fight by any measure. Arthur? Lucifer shouted, already moving to intercept Bishop Vale, who had floated down on currents of dark miasma. The others? The chamber shuddered violently, ancient dust raining from the ceiling. A deafening crack split the air as the floor beneath us began to fracture, the stone groaning under centuries of pressure suddenly released. Go! I called to Rachel and the rest, gesturing toward the hidden passage Dia had discovered. We'll hold them. Confusion erupted as everyone tried to move at once. The priests lunged toward our retreating friends while Vale and the vampire elder focused on Lucifer and me. The rapidly deteriorating floor complicated everything, forcing all of us to constantly readjust our footing. This way. Serafina called from the passage entrance, trying to organize an orderly retreat. The vampire elder moved faster than most eyes could track, but I was ready. Not because I could match his speed, but because I'd spent time training to fight enemies stronger and faster than myself under art. My blade met his clawed hand in a shower of sparks, the impact sending tremors up my already weakened arm. Beside me, Lucifer engaged Bishop Vale, golden light from his blade illuminating the ancient chamber in flashes as they exchanged blows. The miasma surrounding Vale pulsed with malevolent energy, each tendril seeking to corrupt whatever it touched. Another violent tremor rocked the chamber. A massive crack raced across the floor, separating us from the others. Rachel reached out across the widening gap, her expression desperate. Arthur? Lucifer? Keep going. Lucifer shouted back, barely deflecting one of Vale's attacks. We'll find another way. The last thing I saw before the floor gave way completely was Cecilia physically dragging Rachel toward the passage, determination etched on her face. Then everything tilted sideways as the section of floor beneath Lucifer and me collapsed entirely. We fell, along with Elder Lazarus and Bishop Vale, into the darkness below. The vampire elder's eyes gleamed with predatory interest as we plummeted into yet another hidden chamber beneath the palace. The boy has teeth, he purred as we landed hard on ancient stone. How delightful. Lucifer and I exchanged a glance. It was short, sharp, and said everything that needed saying without the need for words. Keep it solo. No tag teaming. No messy two-on-twos. Just us, one each, and may the gods be slightly less cruel than usual. Made sense. If the Elder and Bishop Vale were paired up, then they probably had years of tight synchronization backing them. Like a deadly rhythm section. Lucifer and I? Well, we were more of a jazz duet, talented, yes, but just liable to hit each other with friendly fire as hit the enemy. And the stakes weren't exactly small. They were ascendant rank. Lazarus, the Elder, at mid. Vale, a step behind him. Lucifer and I? High integration. Strong, yes. But in the food chain of power, we were still very much the sort of thing that got eaten by the kind of beings who didn't chew. Arthur. Luna's voice returned in my head like a gentle pulse, slipping back into my thoughts after the haze Alisara had left behind. You can beat him. I wanted to laugh. Not the funny kind. The sort you do when the stress piles up just high enough that it knocks your common sense over like a badly balanced tower of chairs. Because Lazarus, the Elder, was stronger than Bishop Vale. And Bishop Vale had beaten me even when he was exhausted and I was half-possessed, semi-buffed, and fully desperate. And yet, no, this wasn't the same. I wasn't the same. My fingers tightened around the hilt. My breath slowed. Then I lit it all up. Lucent harmony. Soul resonance. Mythic body. Soul vision. Seraphim's embrace. Erebus's crimson bone armor. Wings of Seraphim. Each ability slotted into place like parts of a machine powering up. Light and darkness surged around me, divided cleanly by a membrane of space-enhanced aura, my own version of caution tape. Keep the pure light and deep dark apart, or I'd end up nuking myself before the fight even started. And then I moved. I blurred forward, sword in hand, streaking toward Lazarus with a trail of wind and lightning crackling behind me. The hum of my aura fractured the air. Lazarus didn't flinch. He just raised his hand, coated in night-drenched astral energy, and met my blade. It bounced off like I'd hit a wall of solid myth. But I didn't stop. My wings twisted, caught me, rebalanced me midair. Momentum intact. I flowed into movement. Tempest dance technique brought to life through instinct more than thought. My feet barely touched the ground before I spun back in, blade flickering. Lazarus responded with a lazy wave, and lances of blood bloomed around him like flowers that wanted to murder me. Luna appeared beside me, chibi-sized and glowing, her tiny hands conjuring a shield of pure light. It caught most of the blood lances. The ones it didn't, I shattered mid-swing. Momentum built. Tempest dance wasn't just footwork anymore. I'd taken it beyond. With my current mastery, I could layer it, blend it, fold in other techniques like a chef on a deadline. So I did. Arthur's original sword art, the one he taught me years ago. The one that wasn't flashy or legendary but was sharp. Honest. True. My sword became 2. Then 4. Then 10. Then 20. Then 100. Blades fell like hail in a thunderstorm, each strike trailing aura sharpened by the combined influence of pure light and deep dark. Lazarus's crimson eyes narrowed, and I caught a flicker of surprise. I kept going. Thrust into slash. Slash into downward arc. Downward into upward sweep. No pause. No hesitation. A stream became a waterfall. The waterfall swelled into a river. The river roared into the sea. The sea spread, deep and unrelenting, until it swallowed the edges of what I could feel. And finally, I crossed that invisible threshold. The moment when instinct and intention merged and the blade stopped being something I held. It became me. The ocean surged. The sword in my hand wasn't a weapon anymore. It was motion. It was sound. It was a pressure system wrapped in steel. At the height of it, my grade 5 sword art pushed to its brink, I crashed down on Lazarus again. Strike after strike rained onto his hands. His night-forged astral energy strained. And slowly, it began to crack. I felt it, not just saw it, felt it, Lazarus starting to lose ground. Not by much. Not a dramatic stumble or anything, but there was pressure now. My sword was no longer just being blocked, it was pushing him, carving out a margin, forcing him back inch by inch like a glacier wearing down stone. His eyes narrowed. The calm cracked. Then came the light. It wasn't blinding, just sharp enough to snap everything into clarity. A flicker, not a flare. But enough to mean one thing, he was done holding back. Clang. The sound rang out like someone had smacked the universe with a tuning fork. My blade jolted to a halt in midair, not because I'd stopped swinging, but because something else stopped it. A grin slipped onto my face before I could help it. So, I said, "You're finally done playing dress-up." He didn't reply, but he didn't need to. His flushed face and twitching jaw said it for him. Anger. And beneath it, frustration, like he just realized he couldn't keep fencing with shadows and expect to win. The thing in his hand wasn't just a weapon. It was a statement. A navy blue spear, gleaming with a sheen that wasn't quite metallic, wasn't quite ethereal, but sat somewhere in between, like it couldn't decide if it wanted to exist in one reality or several. Night-wrapped astral energy pulsed along its shaft and shimmered off the tip like heat haze. Then it started to beat. Chapter 469, Vampire Elder 2. Lazarus couldn't believe it. His spear, his pride and symbol of dominance, was in his hands. His body trembled, not from exertion, but from a shame that coursed through him like a poison. He had drawn his spear against a child. A boy who was less than a tenth of his age, a boy who had not surpassed the wall, who hadn't even reached the wall. And yet Lazarus had felt fear. The moment Arthur's sword pressed against his astral energy, relentless and unyielding, a cold dread had crept into the vampire elder's chest. For a fleeting instant, he believed Arthur's blade might actually reach his throat. The shame burned deeper. A vampire elder, an immortal warrior who had faced centuries of battle, forced to draw his spear against a child. It was unthinkable. Intolerable. But it was necessary. As the spear materialized in his grip, its surface rippled with power, the rhythmic pulse of its essence blending blood and night astral energy into a singular, ominous force. The air thickened around Lazarus, his presence swelling like a storm on the brink of unleashing its fury. Lazarus was no mage. He was a warrior forged in the crucible of countless battles. And so he did what warriors do. He struck. The spear tip shot forward with blinding speed, its beating astral energy warping the space around it. The sheer pressure of the attack was suffocating, like the weight of an ocean bearing down. The point of the spear seemed to zero in on Arthur's chest, the promise of death just a heartbeat away. Arthur moved. His body twisted with the precision of a dancer, his sword alive with water and wind-enhanced aura, swirling like liquid grace and roaring gales. He slid his blade alongside Lazarus's spear, deflecting it in an elegant parry that sent sparks cascading through the air. But Lazarus was no ordinary opponent. He was a vampire who had reached Spearheart, a master whose weapon was an extension of his very will. His foot dug into the ground, halting his momentum with the ease of someone who had done so 1,000 times before. With fluid precision, he adjusted, driving the spear toward Arthur's right flank, cutting off his attempt to parry completely. The resonating layers of enhanced aura on Arthur's blade collided with Lazarus's astral energy, but the crushing force of the spear was too much. The aura splintered and fractured, its light dimming under the relentless beat of the spear's power. Arthur felt the weight of the attack, a force not just physical but suffused with centuries of skill and mastery. It bore down on him, threatening to overwhelm. But even as his blade faltered, his mind raced, searching for the next move, the next chance to turn the tide. Arthur's blade danced once more, its movement a symphony of steel and magic. Space and time magic wrapped around him, bending the battlefield to his will as he shifted into position. His sword became an instrument of art and destruction, each stroke a note in an unending melody. A thrust, sharp and deliberate, cut through the air like the first crack of thunder. From the thrust came a slash, smooth and precise, slicing through the moment as though it were silk. From the slash came a downward strike, heavy with the weight of inevitability, falling like a star dragged from the heavens. From the downward strike came an upward sweep, cresting with the grace and power of a surging wave. And the movement did not stop. It couldn't. Each strike flowed into the next, a ceaseless rhythm of destruction and creation as natural as the pull of the tides. A stream tumbled into a waterfall, cascading with relentless energy. The waterfall crashed and twisted into a river, churning and carving its path with force. The river surged, swelling into a sea, vast and unyielding. And the sea stretched out into infinity, deep and boundless, until it became an ocean. But as Arthur's dance reached its crescendo, as his blade moved with the fury and grace of a tempest, Lazarus stood firm. The vampire elder's spear met the blade, its pulse resonating like the steady beat of a war drum. Not enough, Lazarus said, his voice steady, unshaken. His spear struck with precision, and it was as if the moon itself descended upon the ocean. The ocean broke. Arthur's strikes shattered against Lazarus's spear, the relentless tide of his assault undone by the unyielding might of the vampire elder. Lazarus's presence loomed larger than ever, the air trembling with his dominance. The dance was beautiful, but beauty alone could not conquer the moon. Not enough, huh? Arthur muttered under his breath, steadying himself as the remnants of his movement dissipated like fading embers. He hadn't expected to defeat Lazarus with just his grade 5 art. No, that was merely the prelude. The real battle was only beginning. The two combatants stepped back, creating a careful distance. Their gazes locked, unyielding, as if the weight of their wills alone might determine the victor. Lazarus broke the silence first, his tone calm but tinged with something deeper. I will spare your life if you choose to join us, become a contractor of the vampires, and serve the Red Chalice cult. Arthur's brows furrowed as the vampire elder continued, his words precise, deliberate. You are exceptionally strong and talented. With your potential, you could even be contracted to His Majesty himself. You might one day rise to lead the cult. Arthur's lips curled into a smile, sharp and mocking. Are you so afraid of losing that you'd offer me this? Lazarus's expression twisted, his composure cracking under the weight of Arthur's provocation. Afraid? The thought gnawed him. Lazarus had to admit the boy was extraordinary. His strength was undeniable. But there was a chasm between them, vast and unbridgeable. Lazarus was at mid-ascendant rank, while Arthur had barely reached high integration rank. To think someone like this could pose a threat to him was absurd. The very idea was galling. No, Lazarus said finally, his voice clipped but steady. I simply think it's a waste for someone like you to die here. Arthur's grin widened, his confidence unshaken. Don't worry, he said, his tone light but firm. I don't plan on dying. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Neither moved. They simply stood there, watching, waiting. The tension grew thicker, pressing against the room like an invisible tide. Arthur shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No glowing eyes or shouting or sudden gusts of wind announcing destiny's chosen warrior. Just a shift in posture, barely more than a twitch, but it slid through the battlefield like a knife in the gut of silence. Lazarus felt it instantly. Not with his eyes, but somewhere deeper. Primal. His spear heart, a thing ancient, bound to instincts older than war, began to beat harder. The spear in his hand drank deep of night astral energy, veins along his arms glowing faintly as power flooded in to steady him. He braced. But bracing only works when something's stoppable. What Arthur did next wasn't a movement so much as a statement that space, distance, and time could all go take a long walk off a short starship. The battlefield ceased to matter. He blurred, not with speed, not exactly. This wasn't just faster than the eye could follow. It was faster than the idea of watching could comprehend. Got flash, absolute? A grade 6 movement technique in full bloom, enhanced by the purity of pure light, the one force miasma couldn't argue with and wouldn't survive a debate against. His bone armor still bristled with deep dark, yes, but it didn't matter. The moment was pure, untouchable. Lazarus tried. He really did. His spear came up in a blur of reflex and desperation, catching the edge of Arthur's strike, just enough to turn it from a death blow to something survivable. Barely. The force of the impact drove him back half a step, and that meant something. Astral energy hissed as pure light seared into his skin, carving little cracks of agony across his torso. His body began to heal immediately, of course. He was no amateur. But the damage had landed. That was the point. He tried to bring the spear back around. Arthur didn't let him. The tip of Arthur's sword kissed the head of the spear, angled it down with deliberate grace. A simple movement. Final. Like telling someone no without needing to raise your voice. And then Arthur's fingers, cold with purpose and steady with promise, tapped against Lazarus's chest. Tap. It was a gentle thing, really. Almost polite. Lazarus blinked. What? That was the thought that crossed his mind. Not fear, not strategy. Just confusion, short and sharp. Then, danger. It exploded across every nerve ending in his body. His skin lit up with panic. His instincts screamed. And deep inside, the spear heart skipped a beat. Because whatever was coming, it wasn't going to be polite. Chapter 470, Vampire Elder 3. How to beat an ascendant ranker? That question had been answered by original Arthur. In a battle of attrition against an ascendant ranker like Elder Lazarus, defeat was inevitable. Their mana pools were vast oceans compared to his deepest well. They could outlast any prolonged engagement, weathering attacks until their opponent faltered from exhaustion. So Arthur had developed a different approach. Don't give them time to breathe. Chain attacks in relentless sequence. Strike with such speed and precision that even their superior power couldn't find an opening to counterattack. Time slowed in Arthur's perception as he faced Elder Lazarus across the ancient chamber. The vampire's pale features held the casual confidence of a predator who had never known true challenge, a confidence Arthur intended to shatter. Lucifer was engaged with Bishop Vale on the far side of the chamber, golden light flashing against miasmic darkness. But Arthur couldn't spare attention for their battle. Every fragment of his focus locked onto the vampire elder before him. First movement of his grade 6 art, God Flash, Absolute. The technique he'd adapted from Lucifer's original creation from the saga of the Divine Swordsman wasn't meant to be seen, only felt. Arthur's form blurred as he crossed the space between them, his sword aimed for Lazarus's heart with perfect precision. The vampire's eyes widened fractionally, the only indication he was surprised by the speed. His spear intercepted the strike at the last possible moment, night astral energy clashing against Arthur's enhanced aura in a shower of dark sparks. In that infinitesimal moment of contact, most fighters would retreat, reset their stance, and prepare another approach. That was the expected rhythm of high-level combat: strike, retreat, reconsider. Arthur did the opposite. Instead of pulling back, he pressed forward, maintaining contact between his blade and Lazarus's spear. The move was counterintuitive, dangerous, and exactly what the vampire didn't expect. Arthur transitioned seamlessly into his grade 5 art CQC, close quarters combat, a fighting style he'd personally developed for situations precisely like this. Against enemies with overwhelming power, conventional sword techniques weren't enough. You needed to get inside their guard, attack from angles they couldn't defend. Fifth movement of the grade 5 art CQC, 1-inch punch. His left hand, previously held in reserve, shot forward with devastating precision. The movement was minimal, barely an inch of visible travel, but the power behind it was magnificent. Arthur had spent months perfecting the technique, learning to channel maximum force through minimal motion. His knuckles connected with Lazarus's chest. The impact transmitted through the vampire's body like a seismic wave, shattering defenses and crushing ribs beneath the immaculate clothing. Air expelled from the elder's lungs in a surprised gasp as he staggered backward. Most opponents would have been incapacitated. Lazarus merely grimaced. Not yet. Not even close. The vampire recovered with inhuman resilience, pivoting to bring his spear into play despite his damaged ribcage. The weapon's trajectory shifted mid-thrust, night astral energy elongating its reach as it headed directly for Arthur's throat. Fourth movement of the grade 5 art CQC, flicker palm. Arthur's right hand moved in a precise arc, the palm tilted at exactly 37 degrees, the optimal angle he determined through hundreds of trials. His fingers splayed in the specific pattern that created maximum disruption against astral energy. The parry redirected the spear's path by mere centimeters, enough for the deadly tip to miss his throat, though not enough to avoid all damage. The weapon's astral aura sliced a thin line across his palm, cutting through his enhanced aura and testing the limits of his bone armor. Blood welled from the shallow wound, but Arthur didn't flinch. Pain was merely information, and right now, that information wasn't critical. Erebus, Arthur commanded internally, maintaining his relentless pressure against the vampire elder. His lich responded instantly. The shadowy entity that had bonded with Arthur years ago manifested its power, unfurling a domain that enveloped both combatants in its embrace. The effect was immediate. Within Erebus's domain, perception altered. For Arthur, the world crystallized into perfect clarity. Every movement, every slight shift in air pressure, every subtle tensing of his opponent's muscles became exquisitely apparent. For Lazarus, the opposite occurred, his senses dulled, reactions delayed by crucial microseconds. Arthur didn't waste energy replying. Instead, he launched into a barrage of strikes that defied conventional classification. This wasn't just swordsmanship, it was a comprehensive assault using every weapon at his disposal. His elbow crashed into Lazarus's jaw. His knee drove upward into the vampire's already damaged ribs. His sword weaved patterns too complex to follow, each cut precisely calibrated to force specific defensive responses that opened new vulnerabilities. Blood, unnaturally dark and viscous, flowed from multiple wounds on the vampire elder's form. His expression had transformed from amusement to focused concentration, then to grudging respect, and now to something approaching concern. Enough games, Lazarus growled, his astral energy surging outward in an explosive wave. The night energy carved through Arthur's defenses with terrifying efficiency. His bone armor, a technique he'd learned from the Eastern martial traditions, cracked under the onslaught. The divine miracle he'd been maintaining, a protective blessing granted through rigorous prayer and meditation, shattered entirely. Lazarus's spear, wreathed in dense astral energy, drove forward with renewed purpose. The weapon halted mere inches from Arthur's chest, stopped only by the desperate interposition of his sword. For a moment, they were locked in stasis, Arthur's strength against the vampire's mortal determination against immortal power. The elder's lips curled into a victorious smile. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, the young fighter exhausted, his techniques expended, his defenses compromised. Impressive effort, Lazarus said, applying more pressure to his spear. But ultimately futile. Anyone observing might have thought Arthur cornered, his options exhausted. They would have been wrong. First movement of the Grade 5 Art CQC, arc hook spiral. Lazarus had committed fully to his forward thrust, a powerful but ultimately predictable action. Arthur used that commitment against him, his body suddenly twisting along an arc that science claimed should be impossible for human anatomy. The movement carried him around the spear's path while maintaining his defensive sword position. As he completed the spiral, his right elbow, reinforced with the last remnants of his enhanced aura, crashed into Lazarus's temple with devastating precision. The vampire elder roared in pain and fury, momentarily disoriented by the unexpected strike. But rather than retreat, he gathered his astral energy for a decisive attack. Night energy coalesced around his spear in such density that the air itself seemed to bend around the weapon. Arthur recognized the preparation for what it was, a killing strike, the vampire's full power channeled into a single, devastating blow. So be it. He would answer in kind. Second movement of his Grade 6 art, Hollow Eclipse. This technique was still experimental, not fully mastered. Under normal circumstances, Arthur would never attempt it against an ascendant ranker. But these weren't normal circumstances. His sword, Evolvus, resonated as he channeled not one, but all 9 elemental affinities simultaneously into the blade. Fire, water, earth, air, lightning, ice, metal, wood, and ether, each element precisely balanced against the others, creating a harmony that should have been impossible. Then he added the deep dark, a primordial energy he'd discovered during his trials in the well of miasma. The blade turned momentarily translucent, as if existing in multiple dimensions at once. Finally, he wrapped the entire construction in his enhanced aura, creating a multi-layered attack that represented everything he had learned, everything he had become. Across the chamber, he caught a glimpse of Lucifer driving Bishop Vale backward with a series of precise strikes. The crimson symbols surrounding Vale were flickering, suggesting his defenses were faltering. No time to appreciate his friend's skill. Lazarus was moving. The vampire elder thrust his spear forward, night astral energy extending its reach and lethality. Arthur swung Evolvus in a perfect arc, the hollow eclipse technique manifesting as a crescent of multilayered energy. They met in the center of the ancient chamber. Boom! The collision generated a shockwave that cracked the remaining stone pillars and sent dust cascading from the ceiling. For a moment, both combatants disappeared within a sphere of competing energies, night astral against Arthur's impossible construction. Then the sphere collapsed and both figures were hurled in opposite directions by the backlash. Arthur crashed against the far wall, his remaining defenses shattering on impact. Evolvus clattered to the ground beside him, its blade temporarily dimmed from the massive energy expenditure. Pain lanced through Arthur's body as he forced himself to stand. His bone armor was gone. His enhanced aura had faded to nearly nothing. Even Erebus had retreated, the Lich conserving what little energy remained for healing rather than offense. But Arthur rose nonetheless, retrieving his sword with hands that refused to tremble despite their exhaustion. Across the chamber, Elder Lazarus lay motionless. Chapter 471, Resurgence 1. Lucifer's brows furrowed slightly as he spun his sword, effortlessly parrying the incoming blood miasma spell. It hissed as it was scattered, reduced to steaming mist that dissipated against the ancient stone. His opponent, the bishop named Vale, glanced again toward the other side of the chamber, toward the thunderous clash between the vampire elder and Arthur. Through his god's eyes gift, active since the battle began, Lucifer could see the currents of miasma flowing around Vale, the intricate patterns of his blood magic taking shape before he even cast them. The world moved slightly slower through his enhanced perception, mana flows visible as vibrant streams of color and intent. "You're looking away a lot," Lucifer noted, his tone even as he slashed down with one hand. A six-circle spell roared to life beneath his fingertips, bringing down an avalanche of jagged ice shards onto the bishop. Vale raised his own hand. A crimson dome of blood mana flared up to meet the storm. Their spells collided with a deafening crack, sending wind and mana howling in all directions. The floor beneath them fractured further, ancient dust rising in choking clouds. "I just know both of them," Vale said, eyes flicking toward Arthur again. "You know Arthur?" Lucifer asked, narrowing his eyes. Vale nodded. That boy's grown, terrifyingly fast. There was something like awe in his voice. Maybe even regret. In barely a year, he's become a monster. "Still going to die, though," Vale muttered, not entirely convinced. Lucifer smiled. "That's right," he said. "Arthur is strong. Monstrously so." Lucifer knew that firsthand. He'd fought Arthur when the boy lost control during mana deviation. That fight hadn't been a duel, it had been a storm wrapped in a wildfire, sealed inside a collapsing star. And yet Arthur had survived. More than that, he'd grown. Lucifer had surpassed him once. But Arthur always caught up. Always. So he won't die, Lucifer said, taking a step forward. And neither will I. His sword shimmered, light pulsing from the runes etched along its edge. The resonating enhanced aura around it began to compress, folding in, refining, growing heavier. Vale stiffened as the air shifted. His eyes widened. Lucifer didn't waste time after that fight with Arthur. He studied, trained, created. He found a way forward. A new kind of power, pseudo-astral energy. Born of supreme talent, 2 overwhelming gifts, and a mind that refused to accept limits. His sword was now coated in white pseudo-astral energy, crackling with barely restrained force. But more than that, his entire body was sheathed in it. A second skin of order and power. I am order itself, Lucifer said. He took a step. And in that step he vanished. When he reappeared, he stood right in front of Vale. Vale reacted fast. His staff spun, summoning a wicked scythe of blood to block. Lucifer's blade swung back. The first movement of the Grade 6 art myth of the Northern Peak, Winter's Ascent. It was the ancestral sword art of the Windward family, renowned, revered, almost sacred. A masterpiece of ice elemental swordplay refined over generations. It was what made the Windwards feared. But even that wasn't enough for Lucifer. It wasn't that the sword art lacked power, it lacked him. So he rewrote it. He added his will, his gifts, his mana. The movement changed. Now it wasn't Winter's Ascent. It was Winter's Judgment. The pseudo-astral energy of ice wrapped around his blade, merging with the white mana created by his yin-yang body. The temperature plummeted, not in degrees but in reality. The ice became more than cold, it became absolute. Order took form. And Lucifer's sword became judgment itself. The clash wasn't poetic, it was violent and loud and full of teeth. Lucifer's sword slammed against a shield of blood astral energy, a crimson seal etched midair with alarming precision. Sparks flew. Not ordinary ones, these were the kind of sparks that knew magic and hated silence. Through his god's eyes, Lucifer could see the fatal flaw in Vale's shield, a microscopic imperfection in the third sigil barely visible even to his enhanced perception. But it was enough. He adjusted his strike by mere millimeters, targeting the weakness with surgical precision. It was pseudo-astral energy versus the real deal. A battle of budget brilliance against high-tier brute force. On paper, Vale should have won that exchange. Astral energy beat pseudo-astral energy the way a tank beats a tricycle in a head-on collision. The difference wasn't small, it was vast. Like comparing a planetary engine to a very determined toaster. But fights, as it turned out, weren't determined by whose power source had the bigger resume. Arthur had already proven that. His technique, Hollow Eclipse made with the clearly inferior enhanced aura, had sliced through a full astral blade. Not because his energy was stronger, but because the movement behind it was, how did the manuals put it, absurdly complex. A sort of spiritual tax fraud on the laws of magical physics. Vale was a bishop. A proper 7-circle mage. He had astral energy, experience, and robes that billowed even when there wasn't wind. But Lucifer was Lucifer Windward. He had 2 gifts, the ego of a comet and a sword style more dangerous than most wars. He invented pseudo-astral energy during a weekend of boredom and existential crisis. And now he had a Grade 6 art behind every swing. The blood seal cracked. Not like glass, that was far too elegant. It fractured like a dam holding back something older and angrier than water. Vale's eyes widened in that very particular way mages had when their mana calculations stopped checking out. The seal broke. The crimson shards didn't retreat gracefully, they retaliated, swarming Lucifer like shrapnel with opinions. They tore into his protective coating of white mana, drawing streaks of red and flickers of light. But Lucifer didn't stop. He walked forward like inevitability, bleeding and annoyed. This was the mage's mistake. Never let a swordsman get too close. Especially not one who treated physics as more of a suggestion. In his confidence or stupidity, Vale had let the swordsman into spitting distance. Now he couldn't get away. He tried. Gods, he tried. Words began to form, glyphs lit up, and mana twisted itself into something that might have resembled an escape spell if he'd had 3 more seconds and a lot less panic. But Lucifer didn't give him that. Third movement of the myth of the Northern Peak, Frozen Zenith. Lucifer wasn't satisfied with it. Couldn't twist it into something new like he had with Winter's Judgment. It didn't quite obey him the same way. His mastery wasn't deep enough. Not yet. So he didn't innovate. He committed fully. His god's eyes blazed with heightened perception, time slowing to a crawl as he analyzed the perfect trajectory. White and black mana surged from his yin-yang body in perfect balance, fusing with the pseudo-astral energy of ice, layering the movement in raw weight and a terrible chill. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't new. But it was absolute. And sometimes absolute was all you needed when the blade was already arcing toward the spellcaster's chest. The sword plunged forward, a perfect strike aimed at Vale's heart. But as the blade connected, something went catastrophically wrong. Vale's blood magic, compressed into its final defense, erupted in a desperate counter. The miasma around him condensed into pure corruption, meeting Lucifer's strike with equal desperation. For a moment frozen in time, Lucifer saw everything through his god's eyes, the path of his blade, the surge of Veil's power, the precise moment the counterattack would hit him. But he couldn't stop his momentum. Wouldn't stop it. His sword drove through Veil's chest, ice and order shattering the bishop's defenses in a spray of crimson and black. At the same instant, a torrent of corrupted blood magic surged up the blade like lightning seeking ground, slamming into Lucifer with devastating force. Pain beyond reason exploded through his body. His bones felt like they were being crushed and remade into something else, his blood boiling in his veins as Veil's dying magic tried to corrupt it. His god's eyes, still active, showed him the horrific damage in exquisite detail, his own tissues blackening, blood vessels rupturing, mana pathways burning with unnatural fire. The backlash threw him violently backward, his sword still buried in Veil's chest. They separated with the sound of tearing flesh and breaking bone. Lucifer crashed against the far wall with enough force to crack the ancient stone, blood spraying from wounds that appeared across his body like grotesque artwork. Veil staggered backward, dead on his feet, the sword protruding from his chest. His lips moved in what might have been a final curse, but no sound emerged, only a trickle of black blood. Then he collapsed, his body hitting the floor with a dull finality. Chapter 472, Resurgence 2. Rachel exhaled slowly, her fingers tracing intricate patterns of golden light in the air. Pure light, the rarest and most powerful healing magic, flowed from her hands into Dia's injured shoulder where the priest's corruption spell had left an angry, pulsing wound. "Stop fidgeting," Rachel murmured, her concentration absolute as the threads of light knitted damaged tissue and purged the lingering corruption. Dia bit her lip, suppressing a wince. "Sorry. Just hurry. They need us." The distant sounds of battle echoed through the ancient stone passageways, metal against metal, the distinctive crack of astral energy, the unnatural hiss of blood magic. Somewhere ahead, Arthur and Lucifer were fighting for their lives. "Done," Rachel announced, the golden light fading as she completed the healing. She looked pale, the effort of channeling pure light taking its toll, but determination burned in her eyes. Serafina, who had been keeping watch at the passage entrance, turned to them. "We need to move. Now." The four young women exchanged looks, a wordless communication born from countless battles fought side by side, before rushing forward through the twisting corridors. Cecilia took point, her hands wreathed in crimson flame that cast eerie shadows along the walls. Rose followed close behind, her analytical gaze scanning for traps or ambushes. They burst into a vast chamber just in time to witness the aftermath of catastrophic violence. The ancient room bore scars of an impossible battle, stone pillars shattered, frost patterns intermingling with scorched stone, the air thick with the metallic scent of blood and the acrid tang of spent mana. At the far end, Arthur stood swaying but upright over the prone form of Elder Lazarus, the vampire's body mangled but still moving. Closer to them, Lucifer lay slumped against a cracked wall, his sword planted in the ground before him like an impromptu crutch, his body a testament to the price of victory. Bishop Veil's corpse lay in a pool of blackened blood, his chest a ruined cavity where Lucifer's blade had pierced. Gods above, Serafina breathed, taking in the scene with wide eyes. Rachel was already moving, medical instincts overriding everything else. She scanned both injured fighters with a healer's practiced assessment, Arthur wounded but standing, Lucifer barely conscious with multiple critical injuries. The choice was immediate. "Dia," she called sharply, "help Arthur finish the vampire. I need to stabilize Lucifer." Without waiting for acknowledgement, Rachel dropped to her knees beside Lucifer, gasping as her healing senses fully registered the extent of his injuries. Blood magic corruption threaded through his system, eating away at tissue and mana pathways alike. His left arm hung at an unnatural angle, shattered bones visible beneath torn skin. Blood leaked from his eyes, ears, nose, everywhere the corrupting magic had found egress. "You idiot," she whispered, immediately calling forth her pure light again. The golden energy flowed into Lucifer's broken body, seeking the worst of the damage first. "What did you do to yourself?" Lucifer's eyes fluttered open, clouded with pain but still recognizably his sharp, knowing, impossibly blue. "One," he managed through bloody lips, attempting a smile that came out as more of a grimace. Across the chamber, Dia had reached Arthur. The princess, who had spent most of her life as an ornamental figure in her father's court, now moved with the confidence of someone who had found her purpose. Golden light, different from Rachel's pure light but powerful in its own way, emanated from her palms as she steadied Arthur's swaying form. "You're hurt," she said, her hands already working to repair the worst of his wounds. Arthur nodded once, his gaze fixed on the fallen vampire elder who was attempting to regenerate despite catastrophic injuries. "Not as bad as him," he replied, his voice rough with exhaustion. "But I appreciate the help." Strengthened by Dia's healing, Arthur straightened and approached Elder Lazarus. The vampire's red eyes tracked him, hatred and disbelief warring in their ancient depths. "Impossible," Lazarus hissed, blood bubbling between his lips. "You cannot, a mere student." Arthur's expression remained impassive as he raised his sword. "Perhaps you should have paid more attention in class." The blade descended with perfect precision, separating the vampire elder's head from his body in one clean stroke. The ancient creature's form shuddered once, then began to disintegrate into ash, the final death that vampires feared above all else. "It's done," Arthur said quietly, turning back to the others. His gaze caught briefly on Rachel kneeling beside Lucifer, her face tight with concentration as golden light poured from her hands. Rachel worked frantically, her pure light burning away the blood magic corruption that threatened to consume Lucifer from within. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she directed her healing power with surgical precision, mending shattered bones, sealing ruptured blood vessels, restoring damaged mana pathways. It was delicate, exhausting work, especially after the battles they had already fought. "Stop trying to hide how much this hurts," she scolded as Lucifer suppressed another groan when she reset a particularly damaged section of his arm. "I can't heal you properly if you're tensing up." "Sorry," Lucifer managed, his voice steadier now as the worst of the injuries began to heal. "Old habits." "Bad habits," she corrected, not looking up from her work. "You've always been terrible at admitting when you're in pain." A ghost of his usual smirk touched his lips. "Well, if I did, you'd never stop worrying about me." "Someone has to," Rachel muttered, moving her attention to the corruption still lingering in his chest. "Since you clearly don't worry about yourself? What were you thinking taking on a 7-circle mage with blood astral energy?" By now, the others had gathered around them. Arthur, supported by Dia's shoulder, looked down at his friend with a mixture of concern and respect. "He was thinking the same thing I was," he said quietly. "That we needed to buy you time." "And it worked," Rose added, her analytical gaze sweeping the chamber. "Though at significant cost." "Worth it," Lucifer said, attempting to sit up straighter only to be firmly pushed back down by Rachel's hand. "Stay still," she ordered. "I'm not finished." "Yes, ma'am," he replied with a weak chuckle. "This reminds me of when we were younger. You patching me up after I did something stupid." Rachel's hands paused momentarily, a shadow of something complex passing across her face. "You did do a lot of stupid things." "I did," he agreed, watching her work. "Though you always heal Arthur first these days." The statement contained no accusation, just a simple observation, but Rachel's cheeks colored slightly. "That's because he usually needs it more. You're just reckless." "I don't mind," Lucifer said softly, his voice holding a note of genuine acceptance. "I really don't." Something shifted in Rachel's expression, relief, perhaps, or gratitude for an understanding she hadn't expected. Their eyes met briefly, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between old friends who had found their places in each other's lives, even if it wasn't what might have once been imagined. After a moment, she sighed. "I owe you an apology." "For what?" Genuine confusion crossed Lucifer's features. "For what I said before. About you not being hero-like." Her hands continued their healing work, but her voice had softened. "I was wrong. You've changed a lot these past years. What you did today, facing an ascendant ranker and a 7-circle mage, that was stupid?" He supplied helpfully. She bonked him lightly on the head, careful to avoid his actual injuries. "Heroic," she corrected, though a reluctant smile tugged at her lips. "Though still incredibly stupid." "I'll take it," Lucifer said, his usual confident smile beginning to return as the worst of his injuries healed. Cecilia, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly shifted her stance. "Not to interrupt this touching reunion, but we're still in a chamber full of dead enemies beneath a palace controlled by vampires and cultists. Maybe we should continue this conversation somewhere else." "She's right," Serafina agreed, moving toward one of the archways leading deeper into the ancient structure. "We need to keep moving. Whatever answers we're seeking are still ahead of us, and we don't know how much time we have before more enemies arrive." Rachel completed the critical healing on Lucifer, leaving him stable though far from fully recovered. "You'll need proper rest and further healing, but you'll live." "Thanks to you," he replied, retrieving his damaged sword and testing his weight on still shaky legs. Arthur moved to support his friend, offering his shoulder without comment. Lucifer accepted the help with a grateful nod, a silent acknowledgement between rivals who had just accomplished the impossible together. "Which way?" Ciola asked, looking toward the multiple exits from the chamber. Dia studied the ancient inscriptions barely visible on the archways. "This one," she decided, pointing to the eastern passage. "The symbols suggest it leads toward the heart of whatever this place was before the palace was built on top of it." As they moved forward together, Rachel fell into step beside Arthur. "I meant what I said. You've changed." Lucifer glanced at her, something genuine breaking through his usual confident mask. "So have you? For the better?" she asked, and there was a vulnerability in the question that surprised them both. His answer came without hesitation. "Definitely for the better." The hint of a smile touched her lips as they continued forward into the darkness and whatever awaited them at the heart of the Southern Sea Sun Palace's ancient secrets. Chapter 473, Resurgence 3. I was genuinely relieved that Rachel and Lucifer had finally patched things up. No more cold glares across the training yard, no more conversations that smelled faintly of tension and suppressed sword energy. Just the two of them walking alongside me like old friends, pretending the past few months hadn't been a political fireball wrapped in romantic drama. And more importantly, Lucifer hadn't turned into the jealous villain type. You know, the one who grows a goatee, monologues about betrayal, and tries to kill you over a girl. He wasn't going to spiral into some third-rate cliché. That would have been annoying. So that's my level, I thought, walking with Lucifer, Rachel, and the others like we were some ragtag adventuring party with trust issues. I'd fought a vampire elder. Not just any elder, Lazarus. The kind of mid-ascendant rank monster who probably read dark rituals for fun and kept backup fangs in a drawer. And I'd beaten him. It took everything I had. Possibly more than everything if you counted the parts of me currently held together by sheer will and Rachel's healing spell. But I was still standing and he wasn't. In this world, that was the only scoreboard that mattered. I felt something stir in me. A twinge of pride. The kind that creeps in quietly, sits down on your spine, and says, hey, maybe you don't suck after all. Dia had already done a full magical tune-up on my body, and now Rachel was keeping the engine running. Her hand on my back was warm with healing magic, the sort that mended bones and guilt in equal measure. I wasn't quite ready to sprint laps, but I was functionally alive. Lucifer had his arm around my shoulder. He was also being healed, mostly because he looked like he'd gone 12 rounds with a plasma chainsaw. I hadn't paid too much attention to his fight, honestly. Too busy keeping my own insides, well, inside. He evolved a lot, Luna said inside my head. Her voice was calm and ancient, like a particularly judgmental weather report. His control over white mana is nearly perfect for his rank. He only got hurt because he got cocky. He could have beaten Lazarus too. But he's a bit behind you now. Coming from a Chelan, that wasn't just flattery. That was divine accounting. I nodded slightly. Luna didn't lie. Not unless it was funny. I thought I left him behind, I thought, half smiling, but I guess the protagonist is the protagonist for a reason. And then I stopped walking. The others noticed right away. It was hard not to when the guy who just survived an undead war zone suddenly freezes mid-step like he forgot how knees worked. What's wrong? Cecilia asked, her voice sharp and quick. Are you hurt? I shook my head. I wasn't hurt. Not yet. But Luna's senses had bled into mine. And through them I felt something. A presence. No, not just a presence, a pressure. Like gravity got bored and decided to make a personal visit. It was outside, near where the vampire monarch was still being healed. Heavy. Old. Dangerous in the same way a collapsing star was dangerous. Then it noticed us. And then, there wasn't time to blink. Or speak. Or scream. One moment I was standing, trying to interpret existential dread. The next, claws were already embedded in my flesh. I didn't move. Couldn't really. My body had skipped over pain and gone straight to what in the nine hells just happened. And then I saw him. Cassius von Noctis. The vampire prince. He didn't need a dramatic entrance. He was a dramatic entrance. High immortal rank. And not the kind that looked impressive on a resume, the kind that could tear through buildings like soggy parchment and didn't even get winded. I stared into his eyes and felt the weight of history in them. He looked at me like I was a mild curiosity. A wrinkle in his day. An unexpected, slightly interesting net. So it's you, Arthur Nightingale, he said casually as if he were confirming a reservation. He retracted his hand like he was brushing dust off his coat. He wasn't letting me go. No. This was the movement of someone who already knew he'd won. Who didn't need to keep his claws in me to prove anything. To him, I wasn't a threat. I wasn't a hero. I was prey. You know, you annoy me a lot, Cassius said, circling me with predatory grace. Each step seemed to leave impressions in the ancient stone floor as if reality itself yielded to his presence. My friends had frozen in place. Not from cowardice, never that, but from the sheer, overwhelming pressure of his power. It was like trying to move through ocean depths with nothing but determination and lungs made for air. You have the love of Alisara Velcroix, after all, Cassius continued, his voice deceptively calm despite the rage that flickered behind his eyes. The reason she rejected me is someone like you. An ant. I didn't say anything, but my eyes narrowed slightly. My heart stirred once again from the mention of Alisara Velcroix. My thoughts drawled off. Nobody said anything to Cassius. All of us were suppressed by his sheer presence that was on another level from anything imaginable. The vampire prince's perfect features contorted slightly, the mask of aristocratic indifference slipping to reveal something raw and surprisingly human beneath. Do you have any idea, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, how long I've loved her? For years, Nightingale? For years of devotion while she searched for, what? A human? A boy who can barely hold a sword without trembling. He laughed, the sound echoing through the chamber like broken glass. I offered her eternity. Power beyond mortal comprehension. The throne of night itself. And she looks at me like I'm offering a trinket at a village fair. Cassius began to pace, his movements too fluid, too perfect. His night astral energy thickened around him, darkening the air and making it difficult to breathe. His eyes flashed crimson as they fixed on me again. And she chooses you. A barely trained academy student with borrowed power and a martyr complex. The chamber temperature plummeted as his rage intensified. Frost patterns spread across the ancient stone, beautiful and lethal. What does she see in you? He demanded, his composure cracking further. What quality could you possibly possess that I do not? Is it your mortality? Your weakness? Your humanity? He spat the last word like a curse. Lucifer shifted slightly beside me, trying to position himself between us despite his injuries. The movement caught Cassius's attention. And you, the vampire prince snarled, the princeling who thinks ice can challenge night. Don't bother. You're as insignificant as he is. I felt rather than saw Rachel tense behind me, her healing magic still working desperately to repair the damage from Cassius's casual strike. The wound burned with cold fire, resisting her efforts. She speaks your name in her sleep, Cassius continued, his voice a mixture of venom and anguish as his attention returned to me. Did you know that? For years I've heard it. Arthur. Always Arthur. Never Cassius. Never the one who stood beside her through years of darkness. His night astral energy began to coalesce into something more focused, more deadly. The air seemed to fold around him, dimensions bending to accommodate his power. If I can't have her love, he said with terrible finality, then neither will you. Perhaps when you're gone, she'll finally see you. The world exploded into blinding white. A bolt of lightning too precise, too concentrated to be natural, struck Cassius with devastating force, sending him crashing into the far wall. The impact shattered ancient stone, dust and debris raining down in the aftermath. Back, a voice commanded, calm, authoritative, brooking no argument. We scrambled away from the impact site, our bodies suddenly free from the crushing pressure of Cassius's presence. I staggered, the wound in my chest throbbing with each heartbeat, but I managed to stay upright with Lucifer's support. A figure materialized at the chamber entrance, tall, imposing, wrapped in robes of midnight blue embroidered with silver lightning patterns. His hair, pulled back in a severe topknot, was more salt than pepper, but his stance betrayed no hint of age or weakness. Lee Zenith. My master. Seraphina's uncle. High immortal ranker. And quite possibly the only reason we weren't all dead. Uncle, Seraphina breathed, relief evident in her voice. Lightning crackled around Lee's form, illuminating the stern planes of his face. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's and twice as unforgiving, scanned each of us quickly, assessing injuries and conditions with military precision. Sloppy, he commented, though there was no heat in the criticism. But alive. Acceptable under the circumstances. From the rubble across the chamber, a figure emerged, Cassius, his immaculate appearance now marred by dust and a crack across his otherwise perfect face. His eyes blazed with fury as they fixed on Lee. The lightning dragon of Mount Hua, Cassius said, his voice colder than before. You're far from your territory, old man. Lee's expression didn't change, but the air around him hummed with barely restrained power. And you're testing my patience, young vampire. These students are under my protection. Without looking away from Cassius, Lee addressed us. Leave this chamber. Take the eastern passage. It will lead you to the surface. Master, I began, but he cut me off with a slight gesture. Go, Arthur. You've done enough for today. They're not going anywhere, Cassius snarled, night astral energy whirling around him like a storm. Lee sighed, the sound somehow more threatening than any show of anger could have been. I was hoping to avoid property damage, he said mildly. Lord Daedric will be displeased about the renovations. Lightning erupted from his fingertips, arcing across the chamber in a display of raw power that made my hair stand on end. Cassius countered with a wave of night energy, the two forces colliding midair with a thunderous crack. The air between the two combatants distorted, reality itself struggling to contain the clash of powers that should not exist in the mortal realm. Go, Lee repeated, his voice unchanged despite the strain of holding Cassius at bay. This is not a battle for students. Rachel tugged at my arm. Arthur, he's right. We need to leave. Now. Chapter 474, Resurgence 4. I knew Master Lee was right. All of us were just going to hold him back by staying here when someone like Cassius von Noctis was present. The gap between our power wasn't just wide, it was a chasm, the kind that made even the bravest warriors look foolish for trying to cross. We'd already accomplished the impossible by defeating Lazarus and Vale. Pushing our luck against a high immortal would be suicide dressed as courage. So I nodded, meeting my master's gaze with the respect he'd earned 1,000 times over. Thank you, master. And then I turned around to escape. That was my first mistake. My second was believing I had a choice. The air behind me compressed, folding like origami made of reality itself. A cold whisper of movement brushed my neck, the only warning my enhanced senses could provide. Not enough to dodge. Not enough to counter. Just enough to understand I was about to die. Arthur? Rachel screamed. I didn't see Cassius move. None of us did. One moment he was engaged with Lee, their powers clashing in a spectacular light show of lightning and night energy. The next, he was behind me, claws extended for my heart, his face a mask of cold fury. The prey doesn't get to walk away, he hissed. Master Lee's response was instant. A bolt of concentrated lightning struck Cassius from the side, powerful enough to vaporize a lesser being. But Cassius merely shifted, absorbing the impact with one arm while continuing his strike toward me with the other. Predictable, the vampire prince sneered. The chamber exploded into chaos. Lucifer, despite his injuries, hurled himself forward, a barrier of white and black mana materializing between me and Cassius. Seraphina's sword flashed in a desperate arc. Cecilia unleashed a torrent of crimson flame that would have melted stone. All futile. Cassius brushed through their attacks like they were mild inconveniences, his focus unwavering, his target clear. Me. Enough games, Lee growled, his usual calm fracturing under the urgency of the moment. The air crackled with ozone as my master abandoned restraint. Lightning cascaded from his form in waves, not wild but precisely controlled, the signature of a true master. The bolt sought Cassius with unnatural intelligence, curving and splitting to cut off all angles of attack. For a heartbeat, it seemed to work. Cassius was forced to divert his attention, night astral energy swirling around him to counter Lee's relentless assault. That was when everything changed. Domain of eternal night, Cassius intoned, his voice resonating with power older than the chamber itself. The air shattered. Reality peeled back like skin from a wound, revealing something darker, hungrier beneath. The chamber, everything within a 30-meter radius, was suddenly somewhere else. Not physically, but fundamentally. We were in Cassius's domain. Here, light dimmed to a memory. Sound muffled as if trapped under miles of cold water. Most terrifying of all, our movements slowed while his quickened, the basic laws of physics bending to accommodate their new master. A domain at your age, Lee said, genuine surprise coloring his voice. Impressive. But admiration didn't stop him from countering with his own domain. Realm of the Storm Sovereign, he responded, silver light erupting from his core to battle the encroaching darkness. Two domains, two fragments of reality shaped by will and power collided like tectonic plates, creating a fractured landscape of competing rules. In some patches, Lee's lightning moved with supernatural speed, in others, Cassius's shadows devoured light itself. I felt Luna stir within me, her ancient power responding to the clash of domains. This is beyond us, Arthur, she warned. Even I cannot counter two high immortal domains simultaneously. Around me, my friends struggled against the oppressive pressure. Rachel's healing light sputtered like a candle in a hurricane. Rose had collapsed to one knee, blood trickling from her nose as she fought to remain conscious. Even Lucifer, with all his talent, could barely maintain his protective aura under the strain. And through it all, Cassius kept coming. He moved like liquid shadow, flowing between the fragments of Lee's domain, using the boundaries to his advantage. Lee responded with devastating counterattacks, lightning plum blossoms that could split mountains, wind that could scour flesh from bone, but Cassius was too focused, too determined. I warned you, Lee called to us, his concentration divided between maintaining his domain and attacking Cassius. Go. Seraphina grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the eastern passage. Dia supported Lucifer, whose injuries had reopened under the strain of the competing domains. Cecilia and Rose took the rear, their powers ready despite the futility of resistance. We made it perhaps 10 steps before Cassius broke through. One moment the vampire was locked in combat with Lee, their powers creating a maelstrom at the center of the chamber. The next, he was directly in my path, night astral energy coalescing around his hand like a blade of pure darkness. You won't escape me, he said, his voice terrifyingly gentle. Not when your death will finally open her eyes. Lee appeared behind him, moving with speed that defied comprehension, his legendary sword, Stormcleaver, aimed for Cassius's spine. But the vampire had anticipated this, his domain warping space to create distance between them without moving. A child's trick, Cassius mocked, his focus remaining on me. I called on everything I had left, every technique, every drop of mana, every lesson Luna had taught me. My sword came up in a defensive arc, enhanced aura blazing along its edge. I knew it wouldn't be enough, but I'd be damned if I died without fighting. You fought well against Lazarus, Cassius acknowledged, almost respectful. But surely you understand the difference between us. He was a candle. I am a star. His strike descended, perfect, unstoppable, aimed with the precision of centuries of combat experience. I braced for impact, for pain, for whatever came after. It never landed. Crimson threads, delicate yet stronger than steel, erupted from nowhere, wrapping around Cassius's arm and halting his attack mere inches from my chest. More threads appeared, weaving through the air with intelligent purpose, binding the vampire prince despite his struggles. The competing domains wavered, then collapsed entirely as a new presence entered the chamber. Enough, Cassius. The voice was soft, musical, and carried more authority than a shouted command from any emperor. Alisara Velcroix stood in the chamber entrance, her cyan eyes glowing with power, her pink hair moving as if caught in an unseen current. More crimson threads extended from her fingertips, creating an intricate web that completely immobilized Cassius. Release me, Cassius snarled, night astral energy surging as he fought against the binding. The threads tightened in response, cutting into his perfect flesh, drawing blood that was darker than human blood had any right to be. You promised, Alisara said, her voice tinged with disappointment rather than anger. You swore you wouldn't interfere with him. He killed Lazarus. Cassius roared, his composure shattering entirely. Your precious experiment slaughtered an elder of the court. Lazarus knew the risks, she replied calmly, stepping further into the chamber. Her gaze passed over all of us, lingering on me for a moment longer than the others. Something flickered in those cyan depths, recognition, satisfaction, perhaps even pride. Master Lee had recovered his stance, Stormcleaver still drawn but no longer crackling with power. He watched Alisara with wary respect, the look of one dangerous predator acknowledging another. Chief Advisor, he said formally, inclining his head slightly. Your intervention is timely. Master Lee, she returned with equal formality. I apologize for the behavior of my subordinate. Rest assured, he will be disciplined appropriately. Cassius laughed, the sound bitter and broken. Subordinate? Is that what I am to you now? After everything we've shared? Everything I've sacrificed? The crimson threads tightened further, silencing him. Blood now flowed freely from multiple wounds, but the damage seemed to cause him no pain, only the words had hurt him. Alisara looked at me. And she let out a soft smile. You chose correct, Arthur Nightingale. Chapter 475, Resurgence 5. I could feel Master Lee's wariness as he looked at Alisara. However, he knew just how outmatched he was now that Alisara revealed her strength. She was at mid-radiant rank, a classification so rare that most cultivators lived their entire lives without encountering one. The kind of power that made even high immortals look like children playing with sticks. Even the legendary Martial King would barely edge out a win against her, and Master Lee was nowhere near that level. Yet I saw no fear in his eyes, only calculation, determination, and the quiet resolve of a man who had faced impossible odds before. I chose correct? I asked as Alisara's eyes met mine, that unnerving familiarity passing between us like a current. She nodded, a smile touching her lips that didn't quite reach her eyes. You chose what I didn't want you to choose but hoped you would, Alisara said, her voice melodic yet somehow hollow. I desire to own you right now, but waiting will make it all that much better. I shuddered slightly at the manic look in her eyes, that perfect blend of obsession and patience, like a predator who enjoys the chase as much as the kill. The crimson threads around Cassius tightened almost absently, drawing a hiss of pain from the vampire prince. He glared at me with pure hatred but remained silent under Alisara's command. Arthur leaves with us, Masterly said, each word measured and precise. Stormcleaver hummed in his grip, lightning dancing along its edge in response to his emotions. Whatever game you're playing ends now. Alisara tilted her head, regarding Lee with the mild curiosity one might show an unusual insect. You misunderstand, Masterly. This isn't a game. It's destiny. Arthur and I have unfinished business spanning lifetimes. I don't care if your business spans the creation of the cosmos, Lee replied, his voice hardening. He is my student and he leaves with me. Something changed in Alisara's expression, a subtle shift from amusement to annoyance. The air around her thickened, pressure building like the moment before a storm breaks. Your loyalty is admirable, she said. Misplaced, but admirable. Masterly moved with the speed that had earned him his reputation as the lightning dragon of Mount Hua. One moment he stood between us, the next he was directly before Alisara. Stormcleaver aimed for her heart in a perfect execution of the seventh form of the Mount Hua sword style. Lightning plum blossoms scatter the storm. The blade blurred, creating dozens of afterimages shaped like plum blossoms, each crackling with lightning that could vaporize stone. It was a strike that could bisect mountains. Alisara didn't even blink. Her crimson threads intercepted the legendary blade mere inches from her chest, catching it like a spider's web snaring a charging bull. The impact released a shockwave that cracked the stone beneath our feet, yet she remained unmoved, her expression one of mild disappointment. Predictable, she sighed. I expected more creativity from the famed lightning blade. More threads erupted from her fingertips, lashing out with terrifying precision. Masterly abandoned his sword, prioritizing evasion over offense, but even his incredible speed wasn't enough. 3 crimson threads caught his left arm, instantly cutting through his defensive aura and biting into flesh. Lee grimaced but didn't cry out, instead channeling lightning directly from his body in a desperate countermeasure. The electricity traveled up the threads toward Alisara only to dissipate harmlessly against her passive barriers. Enough, she said, almost gently. You're embarrassing yourself. With a casual gesture, she sent Lee crashing into the far wall with enough force to create a crater in the ancient stone. He slumped to the ground, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth, but immediately struggled to rise again. Uncle! Seraphina cried, starting forward only to be restrained by Rose's firm grip. Don't, Rose warned, her analytical mind quickly assessing the hopelessness of the situation. We'll only make it worse. I wanted to help gods, I wanted to, but Luna's warning echoed in my mind, keeping me grounded. Alisara turned her attention back to me, extending her hand once more. Now, where were we? Ah yes, you were about to accept my invitation. Before I could respond, the chamber temperature plummeted so rapidly that frost formed on the ancient stones. Our breath crystallized in the air, and a deep, bone-penetrating cold unlike anything I'd ever felt rolled through the space like a physical entity. Alisara's eyes widened, the first genuine surprise I'd seen from her. She turned, crimson threads forming a protective barrier around her just as the far wall of the chamber exploded inward. Alisara moved in an instant, her form blurring with impossible speed. Magnus' eyes tracked her calmly, his gaze sharp as a blade. She was no ordinary opponent. Her movements were precise yet fluid, every step a calculated burst of power. Her entire body became a weapon, each strike and feint compounding like a melody growing in complexity. It wasn't mere combat, it was a dance, and she was both choreographer and performer. Her attacks came in a relentless tide, each one cloaked in the raw fury of astral energy. Magnus responded in kind, his sword weaving through the air with practiced ease. The battlefield warped around them, space bending and folding as their powers collided. Sparks of energy exploded wherever they clashed, and the air itself seemed to ripple under the force of their strikes. With deliberate precision, Magnus guided the flow of their battle. Each swing of his blade pushed Alisara's movements in a specific direction, her attacks redirected as if by an unseen force. His eyes flicked toward Lee, slumped in a far corner of the cavern. Magnus maneuvered Alisara further, creating an opening. In one fluid motion, he darted toward Lee, scooping him up and depositing him next to Arthur. You monstrous human, Alisara hissed, her voice low and venomous. Her cyan green eyes narrowed to slits, her usual air of amusement gone, replaced by something far darker. The threads surrounding her coiled tighter, snapping and writhing as if alive. How dare you interrupt my playtime? And to think you escaped my 9-circle binding spell and dispatched my vampire venerables so easily. Magnus scoffed, the sound dry and tinged with mockery. Easily? Let's not overstate things. That spell was irritating, I'll give you that. His eyes gleamed with unflinching confidence as his sword shifted slightly, its light flaring like the rising sun, pushing back the shadows. But I'm here, aren't I? He paused, tilting his head slightly as if in thought. Though I must admit, your puppets were sturdier than expected. I didn't have time to even kill one, such a shame. But I was in a hurry after all. Alisara's lips pressed into a thin line. Her threads shifted restlessly around her, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with the blade. Yet beneath the simmering anger, a faint smile began to creep back onto her face, cold and calculating. "Such arrogance," she said, her voice carrying the icy edge of a blade drawn from its sheath. "How delightful. Magnus Dracar, you might actually prove to be entertaining." Her fingers twitched and the crimson threads burst outward, encircling her like the tendrils of a carnivorous flower ready to ensnare its prey. The ground beneath her feet cracked and warped, unable to bear the pressure of her power. Magnus remained unfazed, his stance steady. He raised his sword slightly, the glow of astral energy intensifying. "Entertaining? I'll try not to disappoint then. But don't think for a moment I'll go easy on you." The battlefield trembled as their powers clashed again, each strike sending shockwaves reverberating through the cavern. Alisara's threads lashed out like serpents, each one charged with lethal precision, while Magnus' blade carved through them with effortless grace. They were evenly matched, two forces of nature colliding in a storm of light and shadow. "Ah, what a shame," Alisara said, her smirk sharp enough to cut glass as she turned away from Magnus, her threads retreating with a languid grace. "It seems I won't get the pleasure of facing you after all." Magnus narrowed his eyes, tilting his head slightly, the faintest flicker of confusion crossing his face. Then it hit him, a sudden, overwhelming blast of power. It wasn't just raw strength, it was an oppressive presence, vast and unrelenting, that filled the cavern like a tide swallowing the shore. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Magnus' grip on his sword tightened. His instinctive calm gave way to a flicker of unease as he recognized the undeniable truth. This was no ordinary power. It was something greater, something beyond. A presence that surpassed even him. Chapter 476, Resurgence 6. My heartbeat thundered in my chest as an icy dread settled over me, my face draining of color. The oppressive presence that filled the cavern was unlike anything I had ever felt before, a weight pressing against not just my body but my very soul. My thoughts spun, racing to piece together the impossible. How? How had he awakened already? This wasn't supposed to happen, not yet. This can't be happening, I thought, my mind rebelling against the sight. He shouldn't even be awake yet. His recovery should have been far from complete. This was a scenario I hadn't prepared for. And yet here he stood. As if summoned by my silent plea for answers, my thoughts swirled. How had they managed to accelerate his recovery? Obviously, it must have been Alisara, who was a variable differing from the saga of the divine swordsman. But that didn't matter. We were beyond outmatched. Magnus stood frozen for the briefest moment, his usually unshakable confidence tempered by the sheer presence of the figure before him. Caladros von Noctis was at the peak of mid-radiant rank. That alone would have been catastrophic. But there was more. Alisara Velcroix. She stepped forward as though she were his shadow, her radiant aura no less overwhelming than his, the two presences melding into a force so oppressive it felt like the very cavern might collapse. Magnus could beat Alisara on his own, though barely, but both of them together? Even Magnus would falter. The situation worsened with every passing second. Figures began to materialize behind the vampire monarch, their numbers swelling. Vampires and cult members poured in, forming ranks with the discipline of an army that had conquered continents. First came the immortal rankers, the cardinals of the Red Chalice cult. 20 of them, each draped in robes of deep crimson that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Each cardinal was easily capable of leveling a small city single-handedly, their power refined through decades of forbidden rituals. They arranged themselves in a perfect semicircle behind the monarch, staffs planted firmly against the stone floor. The crystals atop each staff pulsed in unison, a rhythm that disturbed the natural flow of mana in the cavern. Behind the cardinals came the ascendant rankers, the bishops. Hundreds of them, their robes a shade lighter than the cardinals but no less imposing. Where the cardinals were silent and still, the bishops moved with predatory alertness, their hands constantly weaving small gestures that left trails of crimson energy in the air. Each bishop specialized in a different branch of blood magic, their collective knowledge representing centuries of forbidden research. The integration rankers, the priests, came next, their numbers too great to count at a glance. In the thousands at the very least, arranged in perfect rows, their discipline absolute. Their robes were simpler, but each wore a crimson sash that identified their specific role within the cult's hierarchy. Some carried ritual blades, others tomes bound in materials I didn't want to identify. Individually, they might pose little threat to someone of my capabilities, but together? Their synchronized movements suggested they could channel their power as one devastating force. And behind them all, white rankers, the acolytes, the newest initiates, whose presence served as both cannon fodder and future investment. There were tens of thousands of them, their plain robes marked only by a small crimson emblem over their hearts. But the cult was only half of the nightmare. The vampires formed their own distinct hierarchy, moving into position with the fluid grace unique to their kind. At the forefront stood the vampire ancestors, 20 immortal rankers who had once ruled their own territories before pledging allegiance to Caladros. Behind the ancestors came the elders, ascendant rankers who served as the military commanders of the vampire forces. Next were the blood knights, integration rankers who formed the elite guard of the vampire hierarchy. They wore armor of blackened steel inlaid with veins of crimson crystal, each piece crafted to channel blood magic in combat. Their weapons varied: swords, spears, axes, but all shared the same unsettling quality of appearing partially liquid, as though the metal itself might flow like blood at any moment. Finally came the fledglings, the white rankers of vampire society. Recently turned and still adapting to their new existence, they nonetheless represented a significant threat with their enhanced strength, speed, and regenerative capabilities. A full army. The sight was suffocating. This wasn't a battle. It was annihilation waiting to happen. Is the world coming to an end? Cecilia's voice broke through the oppressive silence. She stepped to my side, her usual composure fraying as she stared at the overwhelming forces assembling before us. I swallowed hard, unable to form words because for once I couldn't argue with her. Magnus raised his sword, its dark surface shimmering with astral energy. Arthur, take the others and go. His voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the undertone of urgency. I began, but Magnus cut me off with a glance. You're not ready for this. He turned back toward the monarch and Alisara, his posture unyielding even as the weight of the odds bore down on him. None of you are. As Magnus' sword flared with power, the echoes of the past and the terror of the present collided. Whatever hope we had was slipping through our fingers. Ah, are we late? A voice resonated across the cavern, calm yet sharp enough to slice through the oppressive atmosphere. Everyone turned to see her, Celine Kagu, stepping forward with a casual confidence that belied the enormity of her presence. Her white hair shimmered even in the dim light, and her sheer aura felt like a crack in the darkness, spilling light where none should exist. Unlike Magnus' cold, controlled power, Celine's essence burned like the heart of a star, a blazing inferno carefully contained within human form. Her golden eyes surveyed the assembled forces with a mixture of amusement and calculation, fingers tapping idly against the ornate hilt of a sword that seemed too delicate for real combat, an impression I knew from reputation to be dangerously misleading. Magnus' head tilted slightly, recognition flashing in his eyes. Celine Kagu, he muttered. About time, she said with a grin, stopping beside him, her own aura settling over the room like the first breath of winter. Caladros von Noctis's crimson eyes locked onto her, narrowing slightly. So, you sent everyone here, Kagu, he said, his deep voice rolling out like thunder. Celine didn't flinch under his glare, though her body tensed ever so slightly. Even she couldn't pretend to be unaffected by the presence of the vampire monarch. I figured the Southern Sea could use some visitors, she replied, her grin widening as though they were exchanging pleasantries at a banquet rather than standing at the precipice of war. Magnus glanced at her. Reinforcements? Would I come alone to face this monstrosity? She said, her tone dry but playful. As if on cue, figures began to fill the cavern. They moved with precision and purpose, their footsteps echoing off the walls. First came the blue sky troops of the Namgung family, their robes a deep blue that shimmered like the endless sky at dusk. Their arrival seemed to carry with it a subtle shift in the air, a wind trailing in their wake. At their head was Jean Namgung, the sky sword, his narrow eyes sharp and unwavering as he stepped forward to take command. Jean wore armor that seemed impossibly light, crafted from a material that resembled solidified wind, translucent in some angles, opaque in others. His long hair was bound in a traditional topknot, secured with an ornate pin that bore his family's crest. At his side hung a curved blade said to be similar to the fall of the sky itself. The blue sky troops moved as one entity, their steps synchronized to such a degree that they appeared to float rather than walk. I counted at least 50 ascendant rankers among them, with Jean himself at peak immortal rank. But they were not alone. Behind them came the void vanguard of the Kagu family, their fiery presence unmistakable. Their energy crackled and flared as they moved, a visible manifestation of the fire that defined their legacy. The void vanguard specialized in close-quarters combat without the use of weapons. Chapter 477 Resurgence 7. From another entrance, the Jade Phoenix Guard of the Peng family emerged, their robes of vivid green that seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly light. Their movements were synchronized, fluid, and precise, like a river carving its way through stone. The guard was led by Feng Peng, the Emerald General whose age was impossible to determine from his serene features. His long beard, meticulously groomed and adorned with jade beads, flowed over ceremonial armor that appeared to be made from actual feathers, thousands of them, each harder than steel and infused with natural energy. Unlike the other forces, the Jade Phoenix Guard moved in perfect harmony with their surroundings, their steps causing the very earth to respond. Each member carried a staff topped with a jade orb containing concentrated life energy capable of healing allies or corrupting enemies. Then came the infernal vanguard of the Gu family, their weapons flickering with flames that cast dancing shadows across the cavern walls. Their arrival was marked by an overwhelming heat, as though they carried the heart of a volcano with them. Wei Gu, the Ashen Duke, led the vanguard with the confident stride of a natural destroyer. His bald head was adorned with ritual burn scars that pulsed with inner fire, and instead of traditional armor, he wore robes woven from salamander hide, a material that grew stronger when exposed to flame. A massive war hammer rested across his shoulders, its head perpetually smoldering. The Infernal Vanguard specialized in area denial tactics, their combined powers capable of rendering entire battlefields uninhabitable through strategic application of persistent flame effects. Each member carried a small brazier at their hip containing specially prepared coals that could instantly ignite into controlled infernos. Their 40 members were quality over quantity, with 15 ascendant rankers and Wei at mid-immortal rank. Finally, the Twilight Blade Corps of the Muang family entered, their dark uniforms giving them an almost spectral appearance. They moved with an eerie grace, their presence sharp and focused, embodying the deadly precision their name carried. Jaehyun Moyong, father of Seola, led the corps with the solemn dignity that characterized the Moyong bloodline. His face, stern and composed, showed the subtle signs of one who had weathered countless battles through sheer force of will rather than raw power. His black hair, streaked with premature silver, was pulled back in a traditional style that emphasized the sharp angles of his face, features his daughter had inherited in softer form. The Twilight Blade Corps specialized in assassination and intelligence gathering, their combat style emphasizing precision strikes to vital points rather than overwhelming force. Their 60 members moved like living shadows, with Jaehyun himself at mid-immortal rank. But the reinforcements didn't end with the great families. Smaller but no less influential families rallied behind them, their banners and warriors standing as a testament to the unity humanity could summon in its darkest moments. And then came the sects. The Mount Hua sect entered first, their white robes adorned with plum blossoms. Elder Fong, acting deputy sect leader since Master Li's departure, strode at their front with the serene confidence of one who had witnessed centuries of conflict. His sword, Cloud Splitter, remained sheathed at his side, but the mere presence of the legendary weapon sent ripples through the supernatural energies of the cavern. Behind Elder Fong came the 6 immortal rank masters of Mount Hua. Following the masters were the 30 ascendant rank elders, each specializing in different aspects of the sect's renowned plum blossom techniques. Mount Hua disciples moved with a distinctive rhythm, their steps following patterns based on the Plum Blossom Sword Manual's foundational principles. Rather than forming rigid ranks, they arranged themselves in a flowing formation that could adapt to changing battlefield conditions with minimal communication. The Wudong sect followed, their movements fluid and elegant like a dance choreographed by the wind. They carried an air of quiet power, their martial artists wielding weapons that gleamed with a tempered calm. Grandmaster Zhao, the Wudong patriarch, walked with the balanced gait of a true Taoist cultivator, neither hurried nor delayed, simply moving in perfect harmony with the cosmic rhythm. His plain robes belied his status, the only indication of his position being the ancient wooden token hanging from his sash, carved with the sect's symbol and said to contain a fragment of the original Wudong founder's spirit. Wudong practitioners arranged themselves in a formation resembling the Taiji symbol, their positions constantly shifting in subtle ways that maintained perfect defensive coverage while preparing for offensive opportunities. Their specialty lay in internal energy cultivation, allowing them to fight at peak efficiency for extended periods without exhaustion. Lastly, the Southern Edge sect arrived, their steps sharp and deliberate, embodying their reputation for ruthless efficiency. Their leader's gaze swept the battlefield, calculating and assessing with a precision that was almost mechanical. Mistress Lin, the Severing Blade, commanded the Southern Edge forces with cold authority. Her sect specialized in decisive strikes designed to end conflicts in the earliest stages, prioritizing efficiency over tradition or honor. Her hair was cropped short in the sect's utilitarian style, and her clothing, while formerly a uniform, showed signs of practical field modifications, extra pouches for specialized weapons, reinforced joints for greater mobility. 2 immortal rank blade masters flanked her, each carrying a weapon that had achieved near legendary status. 17 ascendant rank cut elders formed the tactical command, each specializing in a different aspect of the sect's notorious execution techniques. Southern Edge disciples carried a distinctive array of chain-linked weapons that could rapidly transform between different combat configurations based on battlefield needs. Their formation emphasized creating vulnerability in enemy ranks that could be immediately exploited by specialized strike teams. Together, they filled the cavern, their combined auras pushing back against the oppressive darkness that Caladros exuded. A wave of hope surged through me at the sight, not because I believed we could win, but because humanity had answered the call. We would not face extinction without a fight. The vampire monarch's eyes scanned the reinforcements, his expression unreadable. Finally he spoke. So, humanity gathers its remnants, he said, his tone dripping with disdain. Do you think this will change anything? It's worth trying, Celine shot back, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Her gaze shifted to Magnus, her grin returning. Ready to show him what humanity's remnants can do? Magnus hefted his sword, the edges of his aura sharpening like the blade in his hand. Always. The 2 radiant rankers moved to stand side by side, their contrasting energies, ice and fire, creating a harmony that somehow amplified both. Behind them, the assembled forces of humanity's greatest families and sects readied themselves, weapons drawn, formations tightening. Across the cavern, Caladros raised a hand lazily and his forces responded with mechanical precision. The cardinals began a low chant, their voices harmonizing in a language older than recorded history. The bishops spread out in predetermined patterns, blood magic coalescing around their fingertips. The priests and acolytes arranged themselves in concentric circles, creating a living ritual formation. The vampire ancestors drew weapons that hadn't tasted blood in centuries, their eyes glowing with anticipation. The elders hissed commands to the blood knights, who formed a living wall of darkened steel and crimson crystal. The fledglings crouched like predators ready to spring, their newly enhanced instincts making them eager for the coming violence. Alisara stepped forward to stand beside Caladros, her crimson threads weaving complex patterns in the air around them both. She caught my eye across the battlefield and smiled, a gesture filled with such certainty that a chill ran down my spine. For a moment, the cavern was silent, the stillness of a storm waiting to break. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, time slowing to a crawl as 2 forces, one representing humanity's hope, the other its extinction, prepared to clash. I gripped my sword tighter, feeling the weight of everything that had led to this moment. Every training session, every battle, every lesson, all culminating here, in this ancient cavern beneath the Southern Sea Sun Palace. Then, with a soundless signal, the battle began. Chapter 478 Resurgence 8. The air trembled as the four radiant rankers unleashed their domains, twisting the space-time axis into something unrecognizable. The world around them shifted, isolating their battlefield from everyone else. Within this warped reality, the lines of power were drawn, the stakes clear. Martial King Magnus Dracar faced the towering presence of the vampire monarch Caladros von Noctis. The weight of the monarch's aura pressed against the very fabric of existence, a challenge that Magnus answered with the silent hum of his astral-infused blade. Twilight Ice Sovereign Selene Kaga stood across from the Crimson Dancer, Alisara Velcroix. Their gazes locked, the tension between them palpable. Selene's god's eyes shimmered, a faint, cold glow as they worked to analyze her opponent. In that moment, the realization struck her like a thunderclap. She was outmatched. Selene Kagu, though at the peak of low radiant rank, could feel the overwhelming power radiating from Alisara. The Crimson Dancer wasn't just formidable, she was near the bottom of mid-radiant rank, a clear gulf between them in both strength and control. Alisara tilted her head slightly, her cyan green eyes glimmering with something unsettling. "Let's not fight," she said, her voice smooth, almost musical. Selene's eyes narrowed, her breath steady despite the chill of unease creeping down her spine. Her grip on her glaive tightened, the frost-coated weapon gleaming in the strange light of their isolated domain. "And why?" Selene asked coldly, her voice cutting through the tension like a shard of ice. "Would I agree to that?" Alisara's lips curled into a smirk, her demeanor casual, though her every movement was calculated. She stretched her arms languidly, as though they weren't standing on the precipice of a battle that could decide the fate of nations. Her crimson threads wove around her, coiling and uncoiling like living serpents. "Because," Alisara said, "we both know how this ends. You'll fight valiantly, I'm sure. You'll even make it interesting, which I'll admit is more than most could manage. But ultimately..." She leaned forward, her smile widening, revealing a glint of teeth that were far too sharp. "You lose." Selene's grip on her glaive remained steady, but her heart quickened. The sheer confidence in Alisara's voice wasn't arrogance, it was truth. Cold, unyielding truth. "I'm not here to entertain you," Selene replied, her god's eyes flaring brighter, ice beginning to crystallize around her feet. The air grew heavy, frost spreading across the distorted ground as her domain shifted, filling with the biting chill of twilight. Alisara sighed dramatically, the threads around her whipping through the air like crimson lightning. "Ah, so stubborn. It's charming, really." She twirled a finger lazily, and one of her threads lashed out, slicing through the icy mist with unnatural precision. Selene didn't flinch. Her glaive moved like an extension of her body, intercepting the crimson thread with a crackling surge of freezing energy. The collision sent shockwaves rippling through the distorted space, shattering the silence with a sharp, resonant burst. The frost-laden mist swirled around Selene, encasing the ground in shimmering ice. She kept her eyes on Alisara, her mind racing. This woman was too close in power to Magnus Dracar, and that comparison brought back bitter memories. Selene had fought the Martial King once before and had lost, decisively. And though years had passed since then, she knew, deep down, that she hadn't truly grown stronger. The cold truth gnawed at her resolve. The current her would lose. And losing now wasn't an option. "If you're worried about respect or appearances, don't be," Alisara said, her tone almost teasing as her pink hair fluttered in the warped air. "We can put on a good show for everyone else. Pretend we're locked in combat while we, take a break. It'll be our little secret." Selene's grip on her glaive tightened as she studied Alisara. The pink-haired woman's demeanor was maddeningly casual, as though she already knew the outcome and had decided it wasn't worth the effort. Yet there was something unsettlingly genuine in her suggestion. Finally, Selene gave a slow, reluctant nod. Her god's eyes remained fixed on Alisara, watching her every move as the Crimson Dancer gracefully settled into a cross-legged position on the fractured ground. Alisara's smirk deepened as she folded her legs beneath her, her posture radiating confidence. For a moment, she seemed to forget the battle entirely, her cyan-green eyes growing distant. Memories, fragments of something both familiar and alien, flitted through her mind like the remnants of a dream upon waking. She replayed them again and again, trying to piece them together. The face that lingered in her thoughts was unmistakable. "Arthur." Her lips curled into a quiet smile, an expression that didn't belong on the face of someone so steeped in violence. She couldn't explain it yet, but the sensation was undeniable. She didn't need to. "Not now. I'll understand it soon enough," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the humming energy of their domain. "My Arthur." Her mind brushed against the bond she had forged with the vampire monarch, the contract that granted her mastery over blood magic. It was a tether, one that had bolstered her rise to power, but it had grown stifling, a chain she no longer wished to bear. How tedious, she thought, her smile fading as disdain replaced it. The vampire monarch, Caladros von Noctis, was stronger than her. That much she conceded. But even his power was constrained, hemmed in by the same limitations that bound all who clung to the old ways of their kind. He ruled from within the rigid framework of what he had been. Alisara sought something greater. She couldn't simply sever the contract, it wasn't in her nature to discard something so useful. No, she would do what she always did, take absorption, not dissolution. She would consume the bond, drawing in every fragment of power the vampire monarch had tied to her. The blood magic that coursed through her veins would no longer carry the taint of subservience. It would be hers alone. The air around her grew heavier as the first threads of the contract began to unravel. Alisara felt it, the pushback, the resistance, as the vampire monarch's will surged against hers. He wasn't one to let go of his tools lightly. But Alisara smiled, her threads coiling tighter around her as her astral energy swirled with crimson brilliance. "Not yours anymore," she whispered, her voice dripping with a dark promise. "Mine." For a brief moment, Celine's god's eyes flickered, sensing the disturbance in Alisara's aura. She turned her gaze toward her opponent, her caution sharpening to alarm. But Alisara didn't move. She remained seated, her face serene, her hands resting lightly in her lap. Celine could only watch as Alisara's aura twisted and writhed, a crimson hurricane of power that churned through the air. It wasn't just the magnitude of it that made the atmosphere tremble, it was the quality, the unmistakable sense of something breaking its chains. Something transforming. The world itself seemed to shudder in anticipation of what Alisara was becoming. Breaking a contract like this was nearly impossible. To absorb one? That bordered on the unthinkable. The contract tethered Alisara to the vampire monarch, Caladros von Noctis, a being of mid-radiant rank and the most formidable vampire alive. It wasn't just a bond of power, it was a cage, reinforced by the will of one far stronger than her. But Alisara didn't care for impossibilities. She had no time for cages. The contract's power wasn't resisting her as much as it should. No, it couldn't, not when Caladros was locked in battle with Magnus Dracar. The clash of titans, the duel that warped the very fabric of spacetime, demanded the monarch's full attention. Let him duel the Martial King. Let his will falter for even a moment. That was all she needed. Threads of scarlet light spun around her like a cocoon, weaving tighter and tighter as she pulled at the bond, unraveling it strand by strand. She could feel the pulse of the vampire monarch's power, the lifeblood of his magic coursing through her. It resisted her with every beat, but the more it fought, the more she consumed. Alisara's focus didn't waver. This wasn't merely about freedom. This was evolution. She knew the truth. Even as she stood now, a force beyond most comprehension, she wasn't enough. Not yet. Arthur, despite his youth and current limitations, carried a potential that dwarfed her own. She had seen it, felt it in every clash of his blade, in the raw fire of his will. Arthur would one day surpass even the greatest radiant rankers. He would rise to heights she could only dream of. And the current her? She would never reach those heights. Her path, as it stood, would never lead to the peak. But that was fine. Alisara had no intention of staying as she was. If she were to truly love him, possess him, she needed to be more. She needed to become something greater. The vampiric blood Caladros had planted in her body to enforce his will was her key. What he had meant as a shackle, she would use as a foundation. She could feel it now, the dark potency of the blood magic surging within her threads, the taste of power that was both foreign and familiar. Alisara's lips curled into a grin as she drew it in, thread by thread, until it became her own. The transformation wasn't subtle. Crimson tendrils of light burned brighter, suffusing her entire form. Her cyan-green eyes deepened to a luminous jade, glowing with an intensity that spoke of a predator who had seen beyond mortal limits. Her skin, pale as moonlight, took on a faint, otherworldly shimmer. The air around her seemed to hum, vibrating with a rhythm that echoed the beating of an alien heart. She was no longer simply human, but neither was she fully vampire. She had forged something entirely new. A hybrid. A synthesis of humanity's relentless will and the primal, unyielding hunger of vampirism. Her powers coalesced, sharper and stronger than ever before. The threads she wove seemed alive, shimmering with a vitality that pulsed with the rhythm of her transformation. The limits she once felt, the barriers that kept her from reaching the highest echelons of radiant rank, crumbled away. The gates of transcendence made way for her. Chapter 479, Resurgence 9. Celine watched, her glaive at the ready, but she didn't attack. For all her caution, all her preparation, what could she do? Alisara's power wasn't merely growing, it was reimagining itself, stepping into realms that Celine's own strength couldn't hope to touch. Alisara finally opened her eyes, her gaze alight with predatory delight. "I suppose this is what it means to evolve," she said softly, her voice carrying a silken edge. She stretched her arms, her threads swirling around her like the tendrils of a cosmic entity. "And here I thought that contract would hold me back forever. How dull." She turned her gaze toward Celine, the faintest smile playing on her lips. "And now? I have all the time in the world to understand him. My Arthur." Celine braced herself, gripping her glaive tighter. She couldn't afford to let her guard down, not even for a moment. Whatever Alisara had become, it was something far beyond the foe she had prepared to face. But Alisara merely tilted her head as though amused. "Don't worry, Kagu," she said, her tone almost teasing. "I'm not here for you. I have bigger plans." With a single, fluid motion, Alisara turned, her threads dissolving the last vestiges of the contract. Her transformation was complete. And as the fractured space around them seemed to settle, the Crimson Dancer smiled. "My dear Arthur," she murmured almost to herself. "You'll come to see it, won't you? Just how perfect we'll be together." Alisara Velcroix had reached high radiant rank. The air around them stilled as if the world itself held its breath in the wake of her transformation. Celine felt it, the weight of Alisara's new power pressing against her domain like an ocean against a dam. Her god's eyes could barely process what they were seeing. The structure of Alisara's mana had fundamentally changed, becoming something her perception couldn't fully comprehend. "What have you done?" Celine whispered, unable to keep the mix of awe and horror from her voice. Alisara smiled, examining her hands as crimson threads danced between her fingers like living extensions of her will. "I've transcended the limits imposed upon me," she said, her voice resonating with newfound depth. "Caladros intended to keep me as his instrument. Instead, I've taken what was rightfully mine." She rose to her feet with fluid grace, her movement leaving afterimages in the distorted space around them. The ground beneath her seemed to ripple as if reality itself struggled to contain her presence. "You know," Alisara continued conversationally, "I've always admired your tenacity, Celine Kagu. You've clawed your way to power through sheer force of will. It's commendable." Celine didn't lower her glaive. "Save your admiration. I don't need validation from someone who betrays their allies." "Allies?" Alisara laughed, the sound rich and melodious despite the darkness it carried. "Caladros was never my ally. He was my jailer and I his prized possession." Her expression hardened momentarily. "I do not allow myself to be possessed. I am the one who possesses." She took a step forward and the space between them seemed to fold, bringing her unnervingly close in an instant. Celine reacted instinctively, her glaive sweeping in a perfect arc of frost and astral energy. Alisara didn't dodge. She simply raised a hand and a web of crimson threads materialized, catching the glaive with ease. The weapon's momentum died against the threads, its freezing energy absorbed and dispersed harmlessly. "I didn't lie when I said I wasn't here for you," Alisara said softly. "But before I leave, I do need to tie up loose ends." Celine tried to pull her weapon free, but the threads had wrapped around it completely, binding it in place. "Leave? What are you talking about?" Alisara's gaze drifted toward the distant battle between Magnus and Caladros, her expression contemplative. "This world is too small for what I need to become. And Arthur isn't ready yet. He needs time to grow to realize his full potential." Her eyes returned to Celine, glowing with newfound intensity. "And I need time to prepare for him." "You're insane," Celine whispered, channeling more of her power into her god's eyes, desperately searching for a weakness, a vulnerability, anything she could exploit. "Insanity is such a limited concept," Alisara replied, her threads beginning to extend beyond the glaive, creeping toward Celine's arms. "What appears as madness to those confined by conventional thought is often simply a higher understanding." Celine released her grip on the glaive, leaping backward as frost erupted around her in a defensive sphere. Her domain intensified, the temperature plummeting to levels that would freeze most beings solid in seconds. "I won't let you leave," Celine declared, ice forming around her in complex, crystalline patterns that amplified her power. "Whatever you're planning ends here." Alisara watched the display with something akin to fondness. "Such determination. It's why I've decided on a gift for you, rather than destruction." Before Celine could respond, Alisara moved. Not with the blinding speed of combat, but with the deliberate grace of someone performing a ritual. Her hands traced patterns in the air, crimson threads following their movement like brush strokes on canvas. "You see," Alisara continued as if they were having a pleasant conversation, "with what's coming in the Eastern continent, someone of your caliber could shift the balance too quickly. That war needs to play out naturally." Alarm flashed through Celine as understanding dawned. "You can't." "I can," Alisara interrupted gently. "And I will. It's nothing personal, truly. You're simply too significant a piece on the board." Her threads suddenly multiplied, filling the space between them with a web of crimson light so dense it obscured vision. Through gaps in the web, Celine could see Alisara's hands moving in complex gestures, weaving a spell unlike anything she had encountered before. "Consider this a forced vacation, Twilight Eye Sovereign," Alisara said, her voice resonating from everywhere at once. "The East needs to forge itself in conflict without your interference. The pieces must develop naturally." Her threads suddenly multiplied, filling the space between them with a web of crimson light so dense it obscured vision. Through gaps in the web, Celine could see Alisara's hands moving in complex gestures, weaving a spell unlike anything she had encountered before. "This is my parting gift, Twilight Eye Sovereign," Alisara said, her voice resonating from everywhere at once. "A piece of myself planted within you like a seed. It won't consume you, that would be a waste of your potential. Instead, it will wait, dormant, until the moment it's needed." Celine fought with everything she had. Her god's eyes blazed with power as she analyzed the web of threads, identifying key nodes and vulnerabilities. Her domain expanded, frost spreading in intricate fractal patterns that sought to disrupt the crimson lattice. Her astral energy surged, creating barriers of pure twilight around her form. It wasn't enough. The threads moved like living things, adapting to her every counter, flowing around her defenses as water flows around stone. Where her ice shattered them, they reformed. Where her astral energy repelled them, they found new paths. "Don't fight it, Celine," Alisara said, her voice almost gentle. "The Eastern continent needs time to develop without your interference. The coming conflicts will forge the next generation of powerhouses, and they can't do that while living in your shadow." "This isn't about the East," Celine snarled, frost gathering around her in a last desperate defense. "This is about you eliminating anyone who might stand against your plans." "Perhaps partly," Alisara admitted. "But I'm also doing the East a favor. True strength comes from struggle, not from having a radiant ranker solve all your problems." The crimson threads suddenly contracted, constricting around Celine before she could react. They didn't cut or crush, instead they sank into her skin, disappearing beneath the surface like liquid being absorbed by cloth. Celine gasped as foreign power entered her system, spreading throughout her body with unstoppable momentum. "What have you done?" She managed through gritted teeth, fighting to maintain consciousness as her vision began to blur. Alisara approached, her transformation now complete. Her eyes glowed with jade fire, her skin luminous with power that transcended mortal limits. She reached out, gently touching Celine's cheek with fingers that left trails of crimson light on her skin. "I've ensured that the Eastern continent will have to solve its own problems," she said softly. "Sleep well, Celine Kagu. The war that's coming needs to unfold without your intervention." Celine's god's eyes dimmed as consciousness fled, her body going limp as Alisara's spell took hold. The crimson dancer caught her before she fell, lowering her gently to the ground. "You'll wake when the time is right," Alisara murmured, arranging Celine's body in a position of peaceful repose. "When the East has forged its own heroes through fire and blood, without a radiant rancor to fight their battles for them." With Celine subdued, Alisara turned her attention to her final task. The battle between Magnus and Caladros raged nearby, their power warping reality with each exchange. She could feel Caladros's growing fury as he sensed what she had done. The contract between them completely absorbed his hold over her, severed forever. "Time to leave them to their little war," she murmured, her fingers weaving complex patterns in the air. The space before her began to tear, reality itself parting like fabric under a blade. A rift formed, not a portal to another location in this world, but something far more profound. A gateway to realms beyond normal comprehension, spaces between worlds where power could grow unconstrained by the laws of any single reality. Alisara paused at the threshold of the rift, casting one final glance toward the distant figure of Arthur, barely visible through the distortions of multiple domains. Her expression softened momentarily, something almost tender flickering in her jade eyes. "Grow strong, my Arthur," she whispered. "Become what you were meant to be. And when you're ready, truly ready, I'll return." She stepped into the rift, her form dissolving into crimson light as she passed beyond the boundaries of the world. The gateway shuddered once, then collapsed, leaving only a faint ripple in the air to mark where it had been. In the silence that followed, only the unconscious form of Celine Kaga remained, her breathing shallow, her mind locked in a slumber that no healer in this world could break. Alisara Velcroix, the Crimson Dancer, had left the world behind. Chapter 480, Resurgence 10. War. The word looked harmless enough on a page. 3 little letters. Compact. Efficient. The kind of word that wouldn't even be noticed in a government memo until it had already ruined your week. But war, in practice, was not efficient. It was spectacularly messy. It broke buildings, broke people, and occasionally broke the laws of physics when mages and miasma users got too enthusiastic. War was to be avoided like poorly cooked pufferfish or blind dates with nobles. And yet here we were. Not avoiding it. Because when it came to miasma species, the vampires, the red chalice cultists, the shadowy things with too many teeth and not enough manners, avoidance was never really an option. They hated humans. Not in the vague, philosophical way people hated taxes, but in the loud, genocidal, stab-you-through-the-ribs kind of way. So the evacuation plane finally lifted off from the Southern Sea Sun Palace, rising above the chaos below. I looked down through the viewport, watching the battle unfold like a particularly violent painting. The Eastern continent elites were holding the line, their power lighting up the island like an angry aurora as they fought off cultists and vampires in tight formation. The kind of formation that said, "This is probably our last stand, but we're going to make it memorable." Below us, Commander Jean and his loyal Ascendant Rankers had formed a perimeter around the evacuation zone, their weapons flashing with practiced precision as they cut down wave after wave of enemies. They weren't retreating with us. They had chosen to stay, to buy us time with their lives. The realization sat in my stomach like a cold stone. I sank into my seat as the warp engines began to hum, then roar. The ship lurched forward with the kind of acceleration that made your stomach think your lungs had moved in without asking. The palace, our battlefield, our near tomb, shrank to a glittering speck below us, then vanished behind cloud cover. Dia sat across from me, fists clenched on her skirt, her face twisted like she was trying not to scream or cry or both. And failing. A few tears slipped out anyway, tracking silver lines down her cheeks. Hard to blame her. She just learned her father was a traitor. Not the corporate embezzlement kind either. The helped vampires slaughter people kind. Real end-of-the-world resume material. Everything she had been raised to believe in, her home, her heritage, her destiny as princess of the Southern Sea, had been revealed as an elaborate lie constructed around a cult of blood-drinking monsters. Lucifer reached over and patted her back. It was awkward. Gentle. The kind of pat that said, "I have absolutely no idea how to deal with this, but I'm trying." For Lucifer, the ever-composed windward air, even that much emotional outreach was practically a declaration of undying loyalty. The plane's interior was quiet, but not silent. It was the kind of quiet where nobody wanted to speak because words might make things real. We were all huddled in that pressurized tube like survivors from a story that had taken a dark turn 3 chapters too early. Lucifer. Rachel. Serafina. Rose. Cecilia. Ciela. Dia. Me. The ones who had been there when it all started falling apart. I studied their faces in the dim emergency lighting. Rachel, her healer's hands now stained with blood, both enemy and ally. Cecilia, for once not making sarcastic comments, her crimson eyes fixed on something only she could see. Rose, methodically checking and rechecking her equipment as if proper inventory could somehow restore order to a world coming undone. Lucifer, still as a statue except for the hand comforting Dia, his face a mask of controlled fury. Attention students, the plane's AI announced with its usual artificial cheerfulness as if it hadn't just watched half a continent explode. Starcrest Academy and Warian City have both fallen. We are now en route to Mount Hua sect. Ciela stiffened. Her expression blanked out in that way people do when they've just had a part of their past pulled out from under them like a tablecloth under fine china. You could practically hear something inside her crack. No one knew what to say to that. What could you say? I looked at her, my chest tight. I already knew. The vampire city beneath Warian, it had always been a ticking time bomb in the original novel. Now that they'd made their move, there was nothing left of the surface but ash and regret. Serafina shifted in her seat, moving to sit beside Ciela. No words, just presence. After a moment, she placed her hand over the other girls, a gesture I'd never seen from the normally reserved Mount Hua princess. They weren't close, as far as I knew, but some bonds transcended friendship. They were both scions of great families now facing extinction. They understood each other's burden in a way none of the rest of us could. We didn't speak for a long time after that. The plane jolted as we hit turbulence, emergency lights flickering. Through the viewport, the sky had darkened to an unnatural crimson, not sunset, but something else. Something wrong. Eventually, the crimson sky gave way to more natural darkness as we flew beyond the ritual's immediate influence. The clouds outside parted to reveal sharp mountain peaks as the plane began its descent. Ancient structures came into view, Mount Hua sect. A relic of a bygone era, now fitted with futuristic barrier generators, railgun turrets, and enough mana conductors to make the sky hum. Even from altitude, I could see the sect was on war footing. Disciples moved in formation across courtyards, spiritual energy flaring as they reinforced defensive positions. Supply vessels were being loaded or unloaded at various landing pads. The 5 peaks, Heart, Sword, Shield, Spirit, and Heaven, each glowed with activated formation arrays, their ancient power awakened after centuries of dormancy. Serafina straightened, her eyes fixed on her ancestral home. Something in her demeanor shifted, the student receding, the princess emerging. Her hand moved from Ciela's to rest on the hilt of her sword, no longer seeking comfort but preparing for command. We're being diverted from the main landing area, she noted, scanning the communication display. Emergency protocols are active. Mount Hua is in full defensive configuration. The ship banked sharply, heading for a smaller landing pad nestled between 2 of the lesser peaks. It touched down with a soft thump, hydraulics hissing like a sigh of relief. Or maybe that was just us. As the bay doors opened, the chill mountain air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of pine and snow and ozone, the latter from the active defensive arrays. Despite the technological upgrades, Mount Hua still had an air of timelessness. Disciples moved like ghosts between stone paths. The mountains loomed around us, watching. Waiting. A delegation approached as we disembarked, led by a stern-faced man whose bearing spoke of both power and authority. He was dressed not in the traditional white robes of Mount Hua, but in battle-worn armor that had clearly seen recent use. His resemblance to Serafina was striking, the same ice-blue eyes but black hair instead of silver. Father, Serafina greeted with a formal bow, one warrior to another rather than daughter to parent. Daughter, he returned with equal formality before his expression softened fractionally. You are unharmed? I am, she confirmed. His attention shifted to the rest of us, assessing, calculating. These are the survivors from the Southern Sea? Some of them, Serafina replied. There are more vessels behind us. The man nodded, then addressed us directly. I am Mo Zenith, Patriarch of Mount Hua and Serafina's father. I returned as soon as I received word of what transpired in the Southern Sea. His voice carried the weariness of someone who had traveled far and fast, likely abandoning another battlefield to be here. Mount Hua offers sanctuary to all who fought against the darkness. You will be provided accommodations and medical attention as needed. His words were cordial, but his eyes remained hard, not with hostility toward us, but with the knowledge of what we represented. Refugees. The first trickle of what would soon become a flood if the eastern continent continued to fall. We have wounded on 3 of the evacuation vessels, Rachel spoke up, her healer's instincts overriding protocol. They need immediate attention. Our medical teams are standing by, Masterly assured her, gesturing to robed figures already moving toward the other landing pads. Now, please follow me. The council is gathering and they will want to hear first-hand accounts of what transpired at the Southern Sea Sun Palace. As we walked the ancient stone paths of Mount Hua, I noticed changes since my last visit, subtle reinforcements to buildings, new defensive arrays carved into strategic locations, disciples practicing combat formations rather than meditative forms. We reached a massive structure carved directly into the largest peak, Heaven Peak. Ancient doors inscribed with formations so complex they made my eyes water swung open silently, revealing a circular chamber where figures were already gathered around a tactical display. They all turned as we entered, faces grim, eyes evaluating. Not just looking at us, looking through us, assessing our potential usefulness in what was to come. Mo Zenith led us to the center of the chamber where the tactical display showed a map of the eastern continent. Nearly a third of it was marked in various shades of red, territories already fallen or under attack. Starcrest Academy pulsed with a particularly ominous marker, the epicenter of whatever ritual the vampires had initiated. The survivors from the Southern Sea Sun Palace, Mo Zenith announced to the assembly. They witnessed the beginning. An older man with battle-scarred hands stepped forward. Then perhaps they can tell us what we face while we wait for word from Masterly. All eyes turned to us, 8 battered students who had somehow escaped the jaws of annihilation. I took a deep breath, stepping forward to speak for our group. As I did, a communication array at the center of the room flared to life, projecting the image of a harried-looking military officer. Mount Hua. Do you read? This is the Eastern Defense Force. Starcrest has fallen completely. The ritual continues to strengthen. Vampires have breached the Jade Wall. Warian is lost. The Namding family stronghold is under siege. We need immediate reinforcement. The projection sputtered, static cutting through the officer's desperate plea. They're everywhere. There, the transmission cut off abruptly, leaving only a hissing silence. The assembled leaders exchanged grim looks. The older man turned to Mo Zenith. It appears we have our answer, he said quietly. The second vampire war has begun. Mo Zenith nodded once, then turned to address the chamber. Activate the Continental Defense Protocol. Alert all allied sects and families. Masterly is already engaged with the enemy at the northeastern front, but we must secure our other borders as well. As of this moment, Mount Hua sect formally declares a state of war against the vampire forces and their Red Chalice allies. The war had begun. And judging by that map, we were already losing. Chapter 481, Extra Story, The Boy Who Dreamt of Happiness. The graveyard was quiet in the way only graveyards know how to be, too quiet, as if the very earth had stopped breathing out of respect. Or guilt. The wind moved through the leafless trees like a whisper too afraid to be heard, dragging dried leaves across cracked stone paths and old, iron gates left slightly ajar. The late afternoon sun filtered weakly through clouds the color of ash, casting everything in a dull, gray hue. Shadows stretched long and solemn. Arthur walked through it like a ghost who hadn't realized he'd died. He was limping slightly, his left foot dragging just a little with every step. His jacket, black, too big for him and clearly once someone else's, hung open and stained, one sleeve torn clean at the elbow. Blood marked his hands, dried dark at the edges, still wet and glistening on his knuckles. It smeared faintly across his collarbone and down the side of his neck. But he wasn't in pain. Not physically. He didn't flinch. Didn't wince. Didn't slow. He just walked. Row after row passed. Time hadn't touched this place kindly. Moss clung to everything, tombstones leaning like old men with bad knees. Names faded. Dates blurred. But he didn't need to read them. He knew the way by heart. He stopped in front of a grave. It wasn't the grandest. Not the smallest. A simple rectangular stone carved cleanly with a single line beneath the name, Emma. She laughed when no one else could. Arthur stared at it for a moment. Then he slowly sank to his knees. The gravel bit into his legs through his torn jeans and the cold seeped in, but he didn't move. His hands rested on his thighs, the blood starting to dry now, flaking at the edges. His head lowered slightly. Sorry, he said, voice barely more than a breath. I'm late again. The wind didn't answer. Of course it didn't. His eyes, sharper than they had any right to be for a boy of 15, remained locked on the stone. There was something old in them, something wrong. Not tired, not hollow. Just distant. Like the rest of the world was still trying to catch up to wherever he'd gone. It's not my blood, he said after a moment, almost conversationally. Don't worry. The silence held its shape. Not heavy, not light. Just present. Like it was waiting. Arthur looked down at his hands, flexed them once. The memory of fists and pavement and something cracking underneath still burned in his joints. A year, he whispered. It's been a year. And yet, the weight hadn't shifted. The ache hadn't softened. The cold never really left. His fingers grazed the grass at the base of the grave, brushing away a fallen leaf. Feels like yesterday. He pulled a small, carefully woven crown of wildflowers from inside his jacket. The blooms were crushed in places, petals bruised, but still vibrant against the monochrome landscape, blues and purples and yellows that seemed to defy the very air around them. He'd spent hours finding them, picking through patches of weeds at the edges of abandoned lots, behind chain-link fences, in the cracks between buildings where nobody bothered to look. Places where beauty shouldn't exist but did anyway. Like her. A memory surfaced, Emma on her tiptoes, reaching up to place a similar crown on his head. Every king needs a crown, she'd said, grinning that crooked grin that made the world tilt on its axis. Even the king of nowhere. The pain that lanced through him at the memory was almost physical, like being gutted by something dull and rusted. He doubled over, one hand pressed against his stomach, the other clutching the flower crown so tightly that stems broke beneath his fingers. You were the only thing that made sense, he said, forcing himself upright again, setting the crown atop her stone with trembling fingers. The only color in all this gray. His voice cracked on the last word, something splintering behind it. His hand lingered on the stone, tracing the letters of her name like they were braille, like if he touched them enough times, they might spell out something different. Something better. Every day was just existing. Before you. Get up. Eat something. Go to school. Get hit. Hit back sometimes. Come home. Try to sleep. He swallowed hard, his throat working against words that tasted like bile. Then you showed up with your stupid jokes and those books you were always carrying, and suddenly there were possibilities. Like the world had more than one door and you had all these keys. The tears came then, silent and hot down his face, carving clean lines through the dirt and blood. He didn't wipe them away. Let them fall. Let them mark him. Let them be the visible evidence of what was tearing him apart from the inside. I wanted to kill them all at first, he confessed, the words torn from somewhere deep and festering. Everyone who was there. Everyone who watched and did nothing. I know who they are. Every single one. I see their faces when I close my eyes. His hands curled into fists. I wanted them to hurt like he stopped swallowing hard. But I heard your voice. Violence makes the world smaller, Art. And it's already too small for most people. So I ran. I hid. For a whole year. A bitter laugh escaped him, too sharp for his young face. Pathetic, right? Can't even avenge you properly. He gestured vaguely at his battered appearance. This wasn't. I didn't go looking for it. Some guys recognized me at the convenience store. Followed me. Thought they'd finish what they started. Another bitter laugh. Guess they didn't expect me to fight back this time. His shoulders curled inward, making him look even smaller in the oversized jacket. The wind picked up, whistling through the graves, sending dead leaves skittering across the ground like tiny, frightened animals. Some nights I stand at the edge of the bridge. Just stand there. 4 hours. Watching the water. Wondering if the fall would hurt. Wondering if I'd see you after. His voice was very small now, like he was confessing something shameful. Mom hasn't been sober since it happened. Dad's gone. School gave up on me. Nobody's looking for me anyway. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded photograph. The edges were worn soft, the creases deep enough that the image was starting to wear away along them. He unfolded it carefully like it might crumble to dust in his hands. Emma smiled up from the paper, arms slung around a younger, cleaner version of himself. A version with eyes that hadn't seen what is had now. A version who still believed in things. I forgot what you sounded like last month, he whispered, his voice breaking. Tried to remember that stupid song you were always humming, but I couldn't. He cut himself off, choking on the words. I'm forgetting pieces of you, Em. And I can't. I can't lose any more of you than I already have. Arthur's gaze drifted upward to where the first stars were beginning to prick through the darkening sky. His hand reached up reflexively, fingers stretching out as if he could grasp them, pull them down to where he was. Remember when we used to lie in the field behind your house? Count the stars until we fell asleep. His fingers closed on empty air, then slowly lowered. You said we were made of the same stuff as them. Stardust. That when we die, we go back to being stars. A shuddering breath. Are you a star now, Em? Are you watching? The tears were coming faster now, his breath hitching on each inhale. Because I'm still here and I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Every morning I wake up and for a second, just 1 second, I forget you're gone. And then it hits all over again and it's like losing you brand new every single day. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, hard enough to see flashes of light behind his eyelids. When he lowered them, his eyes were red-rimmed but dry, like he'd burned through whatever moisture his body could spare. You want to know why I don't do it? He whispered to the stars, to the grave, to the memory of a girl who had once made the world make sense. Why I'm still here, being a piece of shit who got you killed. The accusation hung in the air between them. It wasn't new. He'd been carrying it for a year, the certainty that if he hadn't asked her to meet him that night, if he hadn't been too scared to walk home alone after the threats, if he'd been faster, stronger, braver, she would still be here. The weight of it had hollowed him out, scraped him raw from the inside. His hand fell back to his side, empty. Because I don't want to be sad anymore. The confession hung in the air, raw and honest. After everything, after all this. I still just want to be happy. His voice was very small now. Is that awful? That even now I'm that selfish? The stars offered no judgment. The grave remained silent. I keep thinking about what you said that time I got suspended for fighting. When I was sitting in your kitchen and your mom made us hot chocolate with those little marshmallows. The memory was so vivid he could almost taste the sweetness on his tongue. You said being angry is easy. Being happy when everything's shit, that's the bravest thing there is. He picked at a loose thread on his jacket sleeve, wound it around his finger until the tip turned purple. I'm not brave, Em. Not like you were. But I'm trying to be. He unwound the thread, watched the blood rush back. Some days I think maybe that's why I'm still here. Maybe that's the revenge, to be happy anyway. To not let them take that from me too. The light was nearly gone now, the graveyard sinking deeper into shadow. Soon it would be fully dark and the caretaker would come with his flashlight and his keys to lock the gates. Arthur knew he should leave, find somewhere to sleep for the night. The abandoned building near the train tracks, maybe. The vestibule of the church if it was raining. I'm still just a kid who wants things to be okay, he said, the words barely audible. And I don't know how to do that without you here. He stood slowly, joints stiff from kneeling too long on cold ground. The flower crown sat atop Emma's gravestone, a splash of life against the gray stone. Arthur touched his fingers to his lips, then to her name. I found a place, he said after a moment. An old apartment building they're going to tear down next year. The guy who watches the place lets me stay in one of the rooms if I help keep the junkies out. It's not much, but there's a window that faces east. I can see the sunrise. Something that might have been the ghost of a smile touched his lips. You would have liked it. He brushed a smudge of dirt from the top of the gravestone, adjusted the flower crown so it sat more securely. I brought your books. The ones you left at my place. Reading them makes it feel like you're still, like I can hear your voice. He shoved his hands in his pockets, hunched his shoulders against a sudden gust of cold wind. I'm on the last one. Not sure what I'll do when I finish it. The first drops of rain began to fall, pattering softly against the stone and the leaves and his bare arms where the jacket sleeve was torn away. I should go, he said, though he made no move to leave. The rain fell harder, plastering his hair to his forehead, running in rivulets down his face, washing away the blood and the dirt and maybe, just maybe, some of the weight. He tilted his face up to the sky, let the rain hit him full force. And for a moment, just one brief, fleeting moment, he could have sworn he felt her hand in his, heard her laugh on the wind. The sensation was gone as quickly as it came, leaving him alone again. But something had shifted, some imperceptible tectonic movement beneath the surface of his grief. See you next week, he said, and his voice was steadier than it had been all evening. I'll bring new flowers. Maybe finish that book. And then he turned and walked away, a boy-shaped emptiness moving through shadows growing longer by the minute. But as he reached the iron gates, he paused, looked back at the small stone now barely visible in the gathering darkness, the flower crown a dim burst of color against the gray. And for the first time in a year, Arthur thought that maybe, just maybe, he might be able to keep his promise to her. To find a way to be happy. To be brave in the way she'd always believed he could be. It wouldn't be today. Probably not tomorrow either. But someday. He raised a hand in farewell, then slipped through the gates and into the night, the rain washing him clean, the memory of stars guiding him home. Chapter 482, War Commencement. The war didn't knock politely on the door. It kicked it down, tossed a grenade into the hallway and marched in wearing vampire boots and cultist robes. The eastern continent hadn't been ready, not even close. One moment people were enjoying tea and training exercises, and the next, red chalice lunatics and bloodsuckers were holding an impromptu apocalypse. Of course, it wasn't just the surprise attack. That would have been forgivable. No, the bigger issue was that vampires at equal mana rank were stronger. Not a little stronger. Stronger in that annoying, unfair, nature-rigged way that made humans look like they were playing at war while the vampires had been born for it. They healed faster, hit harder, and had the kind of combat experience that comes from centuries of not dying. Which is why, at the moment, the battle at the Southern Sea Sun Palace, a place that sounded like it should be hosting a beach wedding, not a bloodbath, was still going strong. That was where the elites were. Not students, not regional guards. The big names. The heavy hitters. And even they were struggling. They'll be pulling out soon, Emo muttered, rubbing the bridge of his nose like he'd just reviewed a tax audit written in fire and blood. We tried to crush them all at once. Didn't go quite to plan? No one needed to ask what not to plan meant. The air in the chamber got heavier, like everyone had simultaneously decided to inhale the weight of their failure. The plan had been simple. The Eastern powers minus Mount Hua sect, who had wisely decided to stay home, threw their elite troops at the island to wipe out the threat in one grand heroic charge. Only the vampires had other ideas. Stronger ideas. Bloodier ideas. Ideas that ended with the Eastern Alliance eating its own teeth. I stood silent among the masters, listening and watching. The issue wasn't just numbers or even power. It was experience. The East had grown soft. That's what happens when you don't live under constant siege like the North, South, or the West. They'd grown used to training for war instead of fighting one. There's a difference between sparring in a polished dojo and surviving an ambush in a cratered battlefield. That difference was now a pile of vampire casualties, and the humans hadn't come out on top. The West, North, and South keep their swords sharp by necessity, I thought grimly. The East keeps theirs sharp for ceremony. Emo finally turned toward us and gave a small sigh, the kind that carried the weight of 20 sleepless hours. You've given us what we need for now. Go rest. We'll reconvene when the others return from the palace. Lucifer raised a hand like he was in a classroom again, voice calmer than it should have been. What about the other students? Half have been sent to the Kagu estate, Emo replied. Safer there. The rest are already here. We won't be talking about sending any of you back home for a few days, assuming there's a home to go back to. None of us argued. There was nothing to say. We nodded. Some more stiffly than others. The air outside might have been clean and cold, but inside the Mount Hua sect hall, it smelled like war, and no one was ready to breathe easy just yet. The guest quarters assigned to us were sparse but comfortable, typical Mount Hua aesthetics, where practicality met just enough luxury to remind you these people weren't monks. They were warriors with good taste. We gathered in what seemed to be a common area, a circular room with low tables and cushions arranged around a central hearth. None of us were ready to be alone with our thoughts just yet. So, Cecilia said, dropping onto a cushion with none of her usual grace that went well. Rachel shot her a look that could have curdled milk. Thousands of people are dying. Show some respect. Respect won't bring them back, Cecilia replied, but the usual edge in her voice was dulled. Even her sarcasm sounded tired. Ciela stood by the window, her silhouette rigid against the fading light. Her hands were clasped behind her back so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She hadn't spoken since Mo's briefing. Lucifer noticed too. He moved to stand beside her, not quite touching, but close enough that she could feel his presence. Your father is one of the strongest integration rankers in the East, he said quietly. And the Muang family techniques are specifically designed for survival in hostile conditions. They've never faced vampires before, Ciola replied, her voice thin and brittle. None of us have. Not in centuries. True, Lucifer acknowledged. But the Muang family has faced extinction before and survived. Your bloodline doesn't know how to die easily. It wasn't exactly comforting in the traditional sense, but I saw Ciola's shoulders relax a fraction. Sometimes the truth, however harsh, was more reassuring than empty platitudes. The room fell silent. No one knew quite what to say to that. How do you comfort someone whose entire identity had just been revealed as a lie? It wasn't your fault, I said finally. Dia's laugh was a broken thing. Wasn't it? I was there every day. I saw the signs. The strange visitors. The restricted areas. The way my father would disappear for days into the lower levels. I just didn't want to see. None of us saw it coming, Serafina stated matter-of-factly. Not even my father. Ciola turned from the window. We should try to rest. Tomorrow will be. She trailed off, unable to find a word adequate for what tomorrow would bring. A shit show, Cecilia supplied helpfully. An absolute, unmitigated disaster of epic proportions. A ghost of a smile touched Ciola's lips. Precisely. Mount Hua sect wasn't just a sect, it was the sect. The kind of place where even the guest rooms had heated floors, mana-regulated air circulation, and windows that could tint themselves at your emotional whim. It didn't matter that a war was going on inside these walls, it felt like the universe was politely holding its breath. We were each given private quarters by the staff, who moved with the brisk, unbothered efficiency of people used to housing radiant rank visitors and the occasional dragon. My room was large enough to host a diplomatic summit complete with a bed that looked like it could classify as a small moon. The sheets smelled faintly of lotus and static mana, and the lights adjusted themselves based on your mood or possibly your blood pressure. Frankly, it was overkill, but I wasn't complaining. I was just starting to debate whether I should enjoy a long bath or pass out face first on the bed when there was a soft knock at the door. Serafina stood there, draped in a silk robe issued by the sect, her silver hair loosely tied and her expression softer than usual. There wasn't any hesitation in her gaze, just the kind of calm you only got from someone who'd already made up their mind. Mind if I sleep here tonight? She asked. Just need something steady. We'd done this before. After battles. After trauma. After days that stretched on far too long and left you with silence ringing in your bones. This wasn't some romantic, breathless moment. It was comfort shaped like routine. Come in, I said, shifting to one side of the massive bed. She padded across the room and slid under the covers like she belonged there, which at this point, she sort of did. No awkward glances, no uncertainty. Just the warmth of her settling beside me, one arm wrapping lightly around my waist, her forehead resting between my shoulder and chest. Her breathing began to slow almost immediately. Thanks, she murmured. I didn't say anything. Just held her a little closer. For now, we didn't have to be soldiers, strategists, or saviors. Just two people clinging to the quiet in a world that rarely allowed it. Wrapped in high thread count sheets and the hush of mana-padded walls, we fell asleep. And for a few hours, that was enough. Chapter 483, Aurora Nights 1. We were woken at dawn by a commotion outside. The kind that suggested important people had arrived and were making sure everyone knew it. After dressing in the clean clothes Mount Hua had provided, functional training garments in the sect's traditional white with subtle blue accents, we made our way to the main hall. The mood had shifted overnight, the air now charged with a different kind of tension. Mo stood at the center of the chamber, his expression carefully neutral as he faced a semicircle of stern-faced men and women in various styles of formal attire. Even without introductions, it was clear these were the family heads and sect leaders who had survived the initial onslaught. I recognized a few, the stern patriarch of the Namgung family, his usually immaculate robes now torn and stained, the matriarch of the Gu family, her right arm in a sling, 3 elders from the Southern Edge sect, their faces grim behind their traditional face paint. Their discussion halted as we entered, all eyes turning to assess us. Or more specifically, to assess one of us. Is that her? The Namgung patriarch demanded, pointing a finger at Dia. Lord Daedric's daughter? Dia stiffened but stepped forward, her chin high despite the fear I knew she must be feeling. I am Princess Dia Solaran, yes. The chamber erupted into angry murmurs. The Gu matriarch's good hand drifted to her weapon. She should be in chains, not walking freely among us. Her father's betrayal cost us thousands of lives, one of the Southern Edge elders added. The bloodline is tainted. She must be detained and interrogated, another family head insisted. Who knows what secrets she might be harboring, willingly or otherwise. Mo held up a hand but did not immediately speak in Dia's defense. The political calculus was obvious. Mount Hua needed these families and sects as allies in the coming war. Defending a traitor's daughter might not be worth the cost. Dia's shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. If my detention will ease your concerns, I will submit willingly, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. I have nothing to hide, but I understand your suspicion. No. The word cut through the tension like a blade. Lucifer stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Dia. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as his cold gaze swept over the assembled leaders. Princess Dia risked her life to warn us of the threat, he stated, his tone making it clear this wasn't up for debate. She fought against her father's forces. She saved lives. The sins of the father, the Namgung patriarch began, are not the sins of the daughter, I finished, moving to stand beside Lucifer. Crime by association has long been discontinued in civilized society. Or has the East abandoned such principles in its panic? The barb struck home. Several leaders bristled visibly. You presume much, students, the Gu matriarch said coldly. This is not your continent nor your war. With respect, matriarch Gu, Serafina interjected, her tone perfectly balanced between deference and authority. It became their war the moment the Southern Sea Sun Palace fell. None of us can afford to reject allies based on lineage now. The debate continued, growing more heated as faction lines were drawn. Some called for immediate arrest, others for banishment, a few for more extreme measures that made my blood run cold. Throughout it all, Emma remained silent, watching the dynamics play out with calculating eyes. Finally, when the argument reached its peak, a cold smile spread across Lucifer's face, the kind that reminded everyone exactly which family he belonged to. This debate is becoming circular, he said, his voice cutting through the clamor. So allow me to clarify something. He took a measured step forward. Princess Dia is under the protection of the Windward family. Anyone who wishes to detain her will have to go through me first. A heavy silence fell over the chamber. The Windward family, rulers of the northern continent with military might that could rival entire nations. You overstep, young Windward, the Namgung patriarch said, though with considerably less conviction than before. This is an Eastern matter. Is it? Lucifer's eyes grew colder, his smile sharper. I was under the impression this was now a global threat. But if you insist on making this a matter of regional politics. He shrugged elegantly. Then I suppose power will determine the outcome as it always has. The words hung in the air, a challenge that none seemed eager to accept. The Windward name carried weight, the kind that made even seasoned warriors reconsider their position. As if on cue, the massive doors of the hall swung open. A contingent of knights in gleaming silver and blue armor marched in with mechanical precision, their movements synchronized to perfection. Each bore the unmistakable crest of the Windward family, a stylized whirlwind set against a northern star. The Aurora Knights of the Windward family. Elites beyond elites. Each one was an ascendant ranker, which the family had hundreds of. And particularly the 24 who came here were radiating intense power that made even the Eastern family heads shift uncomfortably. 3 immortal rankers, 14 high ascendant rankers, and 7 peak ascendant rankers, Luna informed me mentally, her voice tinged with rare awe. The lead knight stepped forward and removed her helmet, revealing striking features framed by blonde hair. She knelt on one knee, her movement fluid despite her heavy armor. I greet King of the East, sect leader of Mount Hua sect, His Majesty Mo Zenith, she announced, her voice carrying effortlessly through the hall. I am Lilith Windward, the one with the undeserving epithet of Stormsword. Her verdant eyes scanned the room before locking with mine for a brief moment. I recognized her from our brief previous encounter, but more significantly from the novel. Lilith Windward, Lucifer's older cousin, 7 years his senior and at high immortal rank. She was a talent capable of reaching peak immortal rank, and before Lucifer's birth, many had thought she would become the head of the Windward family. Lucifer's birth and subsequent showcase of talent had changed everything, of course. More than that, at high immortal rank, she was someone as strong as Lee Zenith. And in this hall, only Mo Zenith surpassed her in strength, a fact not lost on anyone present. She rose gracefully and turned to Lucifer. Lord Lucifer, your father has instructed us to place ourselves under your command for the duration of this conflict. Lucifer's expression revealed nothing, but I caught the subtle straightening of his shoulders, the prince becoming a commander in a single breath. Perfect timing, Captain, he said smoothly before turning back to the assembled leaders. His eyes met each of theirs in turn, a silent reminder of the power dynamic that had just shifted dramatically. Now, shall we discuss actual strategy, or would you prefer to continue wasting time persecuting innocent allies? The Namgung patriarch's face had gone an interesting shade of purple. The Gu matriarch's expression was carefully blank. The rest of the Eastern leaders exchanged uneasy glances, suddenly reassessing the young man they had dismissed as merely a privileged student. Lucifer Windward had just played his first piece on the war's chessboard, and it was a knight's gambit that no one had seen coming.